Hello and welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. We don't give legal advice, but we do talk about how the law works and try to look into our crystal ball to see how things might turn out. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, all the great YouTube-y stuff. And if you want to listen while out and about, we're now offering our live streams in podcast form where you can leave a rating and review. Links are in the description below, as well as to our clips channel where you can find some of the best clips taken from our live streams. Otherwise, if you want to catch me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Locals, Patreon, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by buying some really awesome Legalbytes merch. Again, all links are in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, wherever this video finds you, whether it is you are watching with us live right now or whether you are watching as part of the replay crew. I hope you're having a good week. I hope you're having a good Thursday, good week, and heading out into the weekend soon. How are you guys doing? I have with me, of course, the wonderful Kurt from Uncivil Law and the wonderful Rick from Hoglaw. I was going to say Rick from Virtual Legality. I'm like looking at the screen here from Hoglaw.
I'm from wherever. I'm all over the place. Yeah. Or I used to be. And I have to give the warning. This is actually my first day back after a really rough bout of allergies here in Michigan that was effectively closing one of my eyes. So I do want to tell people if I wind up tearing up, it's really just because I'm emotionally invested in the story that we're talking about. So look out for that.
There you go. There you go. Let me say some. I'm off to a good start. Let me say hi to some folks in the chat. Sarah Freiberg, afternoon from Sweden. Good afternoon. Shirley K, good afternoon to y'all from the Netherlands. Carrie Ann, morning from Ontario. Just Z, Zero's OT, hello from Kentucky. Hello, hello. IULLIAB. I'm just going to read out the letters because I'm not sure how to pronounce it otherwise. Hello from Korea. And Patty G, Jersey girl. Hello from New Jersey. Hey. Laura Ann, hello from Minnesota. So happy to see you guys in the chat. Very happy to see you guys. And I see that there's a chat from a member, Haya, in the chat here that says, hi from Qatar, bracing for the World Cup soon. I'm sure that I don't follow the World Cup, so I don't know.
It's next month.
Is it next month?
It's next month.
My goodness. So I would imagine the city's really preparing for it. It's going to be a huge deal. Traffic is going to be insane. But hopefully it'll be good revenue for the local people, local economy. So
you can only hope.
I hope so. Andy the Game Maker, thanks for another super chat, brother. Says Crypto Cartel is now available for demo on Steam's tabletop simulator.
Excellent. We should absolutely do that sometime.
I agree. I definitely agree. So how are you guys doing?
We're doing great. How are you doing, Alita?
I'm doing okay now that the internet is finally working. I'm sorry that we started off a little late, a little flustered. This always happens whenever my internet craps out on me. I'm like, oh no, we have to start.
I say it's just me. I sit in the green room or the backstage area here on the StreamYard, and then I get a note, usually about time that the show is set to start, from Alita that says I'm having internet problems or technical difficulties. I assume she's just bracing herself for another show with Rick. And it's okay. It's all right. We're going to get through this together. I am told in the pre-show that there are no barrels of acid in this episode, which I'm pretty excited about personally.
Yes. Unlike last time you were here, we are not going through any of the testimony from the Jeffrey Dahmer trial. So we're not going through barrels of acid or other things found in that man's apartment, which is crazy. But that was a really wild direct examination to go through. I think it was a great example of very good storytelling through direct examination. And it was awesome, but yeah, not for today. So, I will say, I see it in the chat. I've seen folks on Twitter and in DMs and stuff, folks are talking about Nick Rekieta. I know that's a really, really big subject. And of course, I wanted to talk about it at the top of the hour here, because it's something that affects potentially all of us, right? Like, all of us have spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears building our channels. We obviously care about continuing our channels, and, you know, we collaborate a ton as well. And so we, you know, we're kind of part of this overall community, right? Whether you want to call it LawTube or not, that's disputed. Nick Rekieta disputes that himself.
My legal colleagues on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things that is definitely of concern. It happened when I was like, I don't know, maybe 4 a.m. for me or something. I woke up to a bunch of text messages and DMs and tags on Twitter and stuff talking about how Nick Rekieta got banned off of YouTube. And I know that he had been operating off of 2 strikes. So I know that he was vulnerable in that regard to a 3rd strike before those previous strikes would clear. Now, and if I'm not mistaken, those can clear over time, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I knew that was something that he was vulnerable to, and it's not just me. Everyone knew that. Nick knew that. You know, he knows very well how the terms of service operate on this channel and on every channel. These platforms give themselves a very wide breadth to operate. They basically are allowed to, by their terms, which of course they drafted for themselves, to get rid of someone for pretty much any reason, so long as someone finds them offensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's built into the terms of service. It's built into Section 230.
Including themselves, generally speaking. Yeah. YouTube can go and decide that they don't want to be in business with you. And that's the nature of being on these platforms. Definitely.
Yeah. Now, whether we like it or not, doesn't matter to YouTube. But I don't like it.
I don't like it.
No.
Yeah, I don't like it either.
I don't like arbitrary and capricious. I don't like the fact that when people can just do things on a whim, in contract or government. You know, you don't really like it when the other party can just do anything they want at any time for any reason. It's like, what kind of a contract do we have then? It's illusory, and it's a existential threat, as you pointed out, to all of us, because Nick had how many subscribers when he was deleted? 500,000?
Something like that. It was like 480.
Something like that. I mean, and so if it can happen to him, it can happen to us. And unfortunately, Nick has landed at least on his feet for the moment, because he seems to have been able to bring his audience over to Rumble and Locals, for example. So he'll continue doing his thing. So he at least seems to be okay in the short term. But I know for me, having gone through my own channel deletion when the crypto people hijacked my channel, like, for me, it's much more of an existential threat, because I don't currently have those things in place. And so looking at this capricious treatment by YouTube, where I think all the strikes are on flimsy grounds, then it's very sort of troubling.
I can't commit to it one way or the other on the details of whether YouTube strikes are justified or not. What I can say is that YouTube is a mercurial actor, and probably didn't tell Nick, and certainly didn't tell me, or didn't tell you probably when it was abducted by crypto agents, exactly what was happening or why.
No, they did not.
It can be very, very frustrating. And I suspect Nick doesn't have the detailed info as to what even the first 2 strikes were about. So I think that that's a problem. I will say, in terms of the commentary, right? I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a wet blanket, depending on who you ask. Hi, Chad. I see you. And I don't know what the background of this is. Certainly, I have seen my colleagues, not calling out Nick specifically, but I've seen colleagues on YouTube say some things that I think are probably going to get them in trouble with YouTube in the past. And I don't know what, if anything, Nick did on this topic. But I do think that we are entering into an era where you can have essentially targeted mass campaigns against people that you don't like, and that's a potential problem. So I think we can all agree that it is uncomfortable to be beholden to a third party that even if we're giving YouTube the benefit of the doubt, probably acted at least a little bit robotically. Got a certain amount of tags. It was the third strike within the 90 days, and bing, bang, boom, you're gone. And that's a little bit difficult to invest in. Now, I've told people, I think I've probably told you offline, Kurt, that all of these platforms do what they want. And if they think that you're no longer good for their business, they will yeet you. This is a term I learned from Emily D. Baker. As soon as possible. I'm just that hip, folks. It's that drip that you're so excited to see once again. And I think people need to know that. And I think certainly Nick did know that. So I don't know. My instinct here is that I don't know that he's going to come back to YouTube. I don't know that YouTube will restore him. And I think that's a shame. And we'll have to see how it goes. But I don't expect that we'll get any better information from anybody. I think you'll have a bunch of people claiming the corpse, and I think you'll have YouTube basically ignoring it. And I think you'll have a good reason to have multiple platforms if you're a content creator, and to visit multiple platforms if you're a fan. And I don't know that that's a bad thing, because I think being beholden to one of these platforms is a bad idea. But I certainly think the rapidity, the speediness, the alacrity that you can lose however many years Nick or anyone else was working on what had to be at that level of popularity, their livelihood, their primary income, is scary. And that's basically all I got to say on that, because we don't have any more details.
Yeah. I'll just say that I completely agree. I think that, and the one thing that I would add to that is the part that really concerns me is the idea that if it was mass flagging, I don't know what the mass flagging was for. I haven't been paying attention to his channel for a bit, so I don't know what kind of
create content. I said this on my show earlier this morning. We are on here so much, we don't get a chance to see each other if we're not directly collabing as often as you might think.
Right, exactly. So, I try to pop into people's content every once in a while to see what everybody else is doing, what they're talking about, and see what I can learn from everyone else, quite frankly. But I don't know what he's been talking about on his channel, so I don't know what the prior strikes are for. I don't know what the mass flagging is for. Personally, the idea of mass flagging feels wrong to me, because it feels like mob rule. And so I don't like that, because I do feel strongly about the idea that we need to be able to be willing to have all kinds of different voices present in our conversation when we are having open and honest dialogue. So being willing to be uncomfortable and offended, quite frankly, so that you can arrive at the truth. Sometimes the truth is offensive. We know this as lawyers.
Nick only called me like 30 or 50 names that I heard of. So, I mean, I don't know.
No.
Nick is his own character.
Yeah.
Nick is my friend, and I'm going to assume that he's in the right until someone proves to me otherwise, because I, as you guys well know, see YouTube and how they act, and they can act in very sort of, as Rick pointed out, arbitrary and mercurial and robotic ways, I believe was Rick's terminology. And there is that problem. And I also know that Nick himself is generally and genuinely a good person. I've spent some time with him. I've speak to him from time to time. And I know that he's a person who is well-informed and has a style that works for him and his audience. Because, I mean, you don't get to 500,000 subscribers without it being something that some people appreciate it. And, he can be something that's not to everyone's taste. I understand completely. But he should be allowed to be on the internet and have his voice. And we all should, as far as I'm concerned. If you don't like Nick, not watching him is always an option.
Yeah.
But
you're gonna make me defend YouTube.
He should be allowed to be he should be allowed to be there for the people who want to see them. I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
Well, you're gonna make me defend YouTube because you say the internet. I don't think Nick's been kicked off the internet, nor should he be. But I mean, YouTube gets to select what it wants to do with its platform. No.
Well, not if Texas has its way, but that's another topic for another time, maybe. And for what it's worth, Rakita Media is based in Texas. So he's got that going for him.
I don't have a lot of hope for that Fifth Circuit opinion.
Well, I reviewed it and I thought it was really, really good, personally.
Oh. Well, we're going to have to work on reasonable minds can differ there, Kurt.
Maybe we'll have a discussion about it sometime.
Okay.
So, but on that note, it segues perfectly into the main subject that I had already prepared to talk about today, because before all of this transpired, because we're talking about the Supreme Court and Section 230. So there is a new case that is going to be heard before the Supreme Court on Section 230, and that is Gonzalez versus Google. Do you guys know about this case?
I do.
Okay, cool. Well, cool. Then we'll probably have some good discussion.
Whoa. I can't promise anything like that. I've heard of this case. All right.
So basically, I guess for starters, for folks that aren't familiar with Section 230, Section 230 is specifically Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. It basically is what allows these platforms to moderate, what allows people to moderate people's speech within their own profiles or accounts or what have you. You know, for example, in the comment section, we're able to moderate commentary, or in the chat without any risk of liability, either from somebody defaming someone else by allowing that communication to be there, or for liability from over moderating that content. So in other words, for targeting people for particular political speech, for example. And Section 230 is very, very broad. And basically, I'll just read directly from Section 230, is that it keeps people and the interactive computer services, so the platforms and whatnot that have these communities in place, it prevents them from having liability for any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access to or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. And that really pulls a lot of weight right there, the otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. So all conversations about the First Amendment, even generally speaking, we're talking about a private company. First Amendment usually is talking about the government. In some cases here and there in California, you've got some case law where they've extended that at times to other places outside of the government. But those are some very, very small cases that are not generally accepted across the board. So when we're talking about First Amendment, we're talking about the government. And this just basically confirms this language right here. Now, I think that one of the areas of Section 230 that I think has maybe not really gotten as much attention in case law, that in my opinion anyway, is the good faith piece, where these platforms are supposed to in good faith restrict access or moderate content or. So that's where kind of like where my sticking point has been on this. But in the specific case of Gonzalez versus Google, you had an instance of essentially a question of promoting terrorism. So there was a woman named.
Can I pause you for just a second?
Yeah.
So you went over C2.
Yeah.
And I'm going to refer to the section numbers here. So C2 is moderation. My understanding is that Gonzalez is a C1 case. So C1 is the one that says, hey, I'm a platform. I didn't make the content. You can't hold me responsible for the content.
Yeah, that's C1 case.
I skipped over that. You're right.
So there's two different aspects, both of which come up a lot in 230. Right. In this particular instance, the question is, when does the magic that I put into my computer service make me responsible for highlighting it to someone else? Right. So Gonzalez is, okay, if you're on Twitter and some idiot makes some comment that is illegal in some way, Twitter isn't responsible for that because they are allowed to be insulated from all the things that the idiots on Twitter say. And believe me, there are a few. But if their algorithm starts punching it to other people, like a YouTube video starts getting sent into headlines or gets sent into your active playlist, or it just plays for you, for God's sakes, the way YouTube works, does YouTube become the person that made that content for purposes of the CDA? Because there's a hard line that says if I just provide the platform, I'm not responsible. But if I manipulate it, I can take ownership of that. And the question is, do the algorithms, does the magic sauce make them suddenly responsible under CDA?
Yeah.
You can view Google in that sense as basically a co-conspirator, which also goes to C1, because they're responsible for, in part, creating or promoting the content.
Yeah. So let me read the text of C1. You're absolutely right. I totally had it here. I just skipped over it.
That happens all the time with 230 stuff.
So section C1 says no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So if you read the language of that, it's pretty straightforward. It says any information that's out there, they're not liable for. They're not. And I should clarify too, that when we're talking about a publisher versus a platform, we're talking about like the New York Times that gets to decide which articles are going to run in the New York Times. You have an editor there that is making all of these editorial decisions as to not just the actual content of the articles themselves, but also the placement of them, which stories are going to even take in the first place. Those are all very active decisions as to what is in and what is out. Now, when it comes to a social media platform, you have all of this information that is coming in from a grassroots level. And so that was one of the reasons why they have this section in the first place, is basically to say there's no way that these platforms could possibly manage all of this information that is coming up from the grassroots level. You don't have this pyramid structure like you would at the New York Times, for example. But what is happening here is that Justice Thomas on the Supreme Court has said previously that he's basically hinted at his thoughts on whether or not that actually is continuing to be true because of the amount of power that these platforms actually do wield. He's referred to it as a communications utility, so to speak, because of that level of control, and saying that Google is essentially an information gatekeeper now.
He's offered it up. He's offered it up as a concept. I mean, the one thing that people do in concurrences is like, I have a question, because their opinion isn't otherwise going to decide that case in front of them. But certainly Justice Thomas has said maybe these internet platforms need to be treated more like utilities, which of course is not the Supreme Court's purview. So what they have in front of them is to look at 230 and see if they've been interpreting it wrong the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And would you mind putting this on screen real fast? Because I just want to show someone the definitions that we're playing with here. So this is Section 230, the Communications Decency Act. You can find it 47 USC 230 if you want to look it up as well. That's where it's codified, as they say.
Yeah, it's also the way to say it, fancy.
That's the way to say it in the fancy way. And what we're talking about right now is this provision C1, protection for Good Samaritan blocking and screening of offensive material. C1 is the material. It says no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. And also interesting is if you actually go down, it actually defines some of these terms. It says what an information content provider is in F3. The term information content provider means any person or entity that's responsible in whole or part for creation or development of information provided through the internet or any interactive computer service. So one of the ideas that's in play here is that Google, YouTube, through its recommendation engines, is now responsible in whole or part for creation or development of the information. And so that's some of the definitions that they're playing with. So I just wanted to show the text so we got that going on.
For the record, folks, if you're on Twitter and you're having a publisher versus platform fight, none of those words appear in 230. These are actually how they are framed. So the publisher would be the interactive computer service. The provider is the information content provider. These are the way these things are defined. And it is defined. It has long been a question mark as to whether development in part is actually pretty broad in the legal landscape, right? Development in part.
Well, yeah. That's pretty broad.
Is that just like a featherweight? You just put like a tiny little bit of involvement?
To me, it's like, all right, if you're on Twitter and they add in a warning that this is disinformation, have they now developed in part whatever it is that you just said? Have they taken on liability for that tweet, for instance? There's all sorts of questions about when you add these various things on. And as I often say on my side of YouTube, the law is slow. especially when it comes to technology issues. We're about like 30 years back answering any of these questions. So the Supreme Court is going to look at this and say, okay, YouTube, if you highlight ISIS videos for people, did you just develop that ISIS video in part? Because they would never have seen it if you didn't put it in front of their eyes. And then you get into real politic, right? And then it's like, well, but okay, maybe 230 doesn't exactly say that, but should it?
Yeah,
Should
exactly.
YouTube feel bad about themselves for this? And the unfortunate part from the political standpoint is I think most people would agree YouTube should feel bad about putting ISIS videos in front of people. And so what'll the court do? Question mark, question mark, question mark. But they took it up, which means they're looking at potentially changing the way things are.
In a pretty dramatic way. Because if the plaintiffs are right here, it would suggest that, as long as they don't touch it, if what they are doing is removing the content, if what they're doing is just allowing the content to sit, they're fine. But if they are doing anything that promotes the content, puts it out in front of you, like they're using their algorithms to suggest new stuff, you look at F3 and you're like, maybe that's a problem.
Yeah. And so to clarify, the specific case that's going in front of the Supreme Court, Gonzalez versus Google, is about a woman named Nohemi Gonzalez who was killed in a Paris terrorist attack in 2015. And basically her family is alleging that YouTube allowed ISIS to post videos and other content to communicate the terrorist group's message, to radicalize new recruits, and to generally further its mission. Basically saying by this function of where, okay, let me back up. The way that YouTube works is you click on a video, you like the video, you watch it to a certain extent, and then YouTube says, oh, you like that kind of content. You like lo-fi beats. Okay, I'm going to put more videos with lo-fi beats in front of you and see if you'll click on them. So when it comes to the kind of content put out there by groups like ISIS, that means that if somebody clicks on it once, they're going to get that suggested more and more. And so the argument here is that this function of suggesting this kind of material is exactly what we're talking about here, which is the potentially adding to the content. And in fact, like they're the ones that are, I guess, editorializing it by actively placing it in front of these people.
I think that's the argument. I think the problem is that, let's imagine that the platforms are responsible for what the recommendations algorithms do. What in the world happens to how these platforms operate? They aren't going to take that liability. And I think the risk is, we're talking about like Nick, we're talking about us at the top of this video. I see a world in which if they're responsible for what their recommendation algorithms are, they aren't giving the recommendations to anything but the biggest partners that they know can cover the insurance problems for them, or that are otherwise willing to enter into contractual indemnification arrangements for these companies. And so I'm a pretty true believer in the concepts of what 230 does to make the internet possible, even as much as I sit here and say, well, maybe YouTube should be allowed to yeet me if that's what they feel like. That still allows for platforms.
Under no circumstances should YouTube be allowed to yeet you, Richard.
I think I'm also a firm believer in allowing yourself to invest in platforms and decide who you want to do business with. So
I'm investing in you.
All right, I appreciate it. I do. I look forward to that check. But I would also, as the business lawyer puts his hat on, say, my God, if we can't have our algorithms doing anything, then things change, and in a way I don't think people would like very much. This is the problem I have with both Trump's and Biden's attacks on 230, which is one, they're in Kuwait and they're just kind of generalized. Those big tech platforms are too bad. And two, the way the internet functions is on a premise that you aren't responsible for your brother's speech. And if you make it so that there's question marks about that, that becomes a problem. I mean, honestly, my channel has grown in part because occasionally when YouTube deigns to do so, it puts my stuff in front of people's faces, right? And if they are like, well, we don't know that asshole from a hole in the ground, they're not going to do that.
I mean, that's the real problem. That's the real problem. 230 is not promoting and developing my content. That's the real issue.
Well, I'm self-interested on this. I'm fully willing to say that. I'm not. But like, I'm self-interested also in the concept of more voices, right? I want more voices. I think everybody should have a voice. You want to talk about like things like the bands we were talking about earlier. The problem I have with it is that more voices should be allowed.
More voices that are mine,
Well, no, I mean, I wouldn't comport myself with the way at least half of my colleagues on YouTube do from a legal perspective.
Right? Is he talking about you, Alita, or is he talking about me?
Nope.
Which half of us?
No, I wouldn't comport myself the same. And you know what? That's actually an okay thing because variety is the spice of life. And if you can get more and better information out there with different voices and different approaches, I'm all for it. But God, yeah. I mean, like 230 exists because of an old line of potential liability issues for a service that none of you remember called Prodigy. And if that winds up coming back, I don't think we love the internet in which platforms have to be wary of what their people say. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. And it seems like, it's if you were to look at polling on whether Section 230 should be amended, bipartisan issue, everyone agrees it should be amended. But in which way should it be amended?
Yeah.
It's a completely different story.
I've said Republicans and Democrats can agree on one thing, and that is that you all that aren't politicians have too much power to talk about stuff. So Biden, Trump, everybody says that is unacceptable.
Especially if you are talking about the other side that's,
Yes.
that disagrees with me.
It's always the bad people. Yes. It's always, you always frame
It's
it
always
that
the
way.
bad people with the bad speech.
But that's
and the
the
hate
honest
speech.
truth.
Yeah.
What does that look like exactly? And to whom? Oh,
Yeah.
good times.
Well, let me get this super chat here from Uliab, Uliab or IULLIAB. Either way.
Julia B. No?
Yulia B. Oh, Yulia B. Okay, that could be. I think you're probably right about that. Says, do you think the problem is with Section 230 itself, or is it only with its interpretation? If you could, would you change Section 230 and how? So first off, thanks so much for the super chat.
The problem is with the law because the Communications Decency Act was passed in 1996. In 1996, the internet was a somewhat different place than it is today. It was written specifically in mind, as Richard pointed out, based on cases involving Prodigy and CompuServe. And, those companies are not exactly thriving today. So this is way early in Internet 1.0 when AOL, for example, you just signed into AOL and AOL curated everything and they had their homepage and basically you stayed inside of AOL's menu or Prodigy's or CompuServe's as the case may be. It was not built for social media and it's certainly not built for where things are going. And so the law isn't, the technology always goes faster than law. And so we have been trying to graft the current reality onto the law for some time. And I don't know whether it's true, but it probably is true that things are just moving faster and faster all the time. It's like kind of like an exponential curve because the fact that we are grafting things onto old laws is not itself like a new concept. From time to time, especially if you're doing like a constitutional interpretation case, you're bringing out stuff. Okay, this was passed in 1788, and we're in order to interpret like what the freedom of speech is, let's go consult a case from the 14th century. So the idea of consulting grafting, first, the idea that in a First Amendment case you might be talking about a case that's literally 500 years old is not unheard of. But technology is moving so fast and more information is being created so fast, the total amount of information that human beings are creating is being done so fast that the old system is a little bit breaking. So fun times.
Yeah.
Sorry if that was too much of me talking.
No, that's okay.
We should revise laws more often. I don't even think it needs to be limited to 230. We should probably look at these things a little bit more often. But no, I mean, look, like I said, I think 230 provides an important bulwark for allowing people to have their voices heard on the internet. Do I think it can be reformed? Yes. As a matter of fact, C2, which you started out with, Alita, I think deserves a lot more reform than C1 specifically. And so I do think you can get into a place where you over moderate and you actually do become that content provider just by the nature of sculpting the messages that are on your particular website. And I think that should be addressed by the law. But I also don't want our 9-robed Nazgul to make decisions about what Congress passed one way or the other. I'm much more in favor of
Richard has hot takes on the Supreme Court.
The Nazgul, they are. I much prefer
They're
to have
Death
them
Eaters.
Say,
Their very touch is death.
well, they took rings of power and they succumbed to belief in the authority that they have. You never heard of those as the Nazgul? I think I call them the Nazgul all the time. But that they should instead, if they've got a problem with what 230 does, I prefer the court opinions that say, man, this is screwed up. Somebody in the legislative branch should get on this. And
you want the legislative branch to do their job? That's a nice joke. You got another one?
Those are my preferred versions of court opinions.
There have been a few of those. There have been a few of those where the Supreme Court has said, you know what, this isn't up to us. And if Congress wants to do something about it, they can do it. And then Congress actually did something. It's happened a few times.
I'm telling you, Congress is on board with curtailing the tech platforms. I just rather see our elected representatives do it.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think that although the one place where the courts could probably give some more love, though, is probably what I mentioned earlier, is the good faith piece about good faith moderation. What is it? Yeah. What does it mean to be moderating in good faith?
Also,
how do we know?
Because that residual clause has been just read so expansively.
Well, what is good faith about being offended? If I'm offended by the existence of Democrats or Republicans, then I'm in good faith moderating against those things on my platform. No?
In good faith, I'm offended by you.
This is true, though. I know this. I offend a lot of folks.
Fair point. Well, so speaking of offending people on social media platforms,
yes,
let's talk. Let's talk about Twitter and Elon Musk. So
excellent, great transition. 10 out of 10.
Today, Alita. Put some likes in the like button for Alita's segues today, folks.
Thank you. Okay, I have not yet talked about this issue at all. I know, Rick, you have talked about this extensively. Kurt, I don't know how much you've talked about this on your channel. But,
a little bit, but not nearly as much as Rick has.
Allergy-riddled sick leave to do a 12-minute video on this.
Rick has been doing it like blow by blow.
Yeah. He's been on this case like white on rice, basically.
I'm on it.
So I can give the basic background to this, but I'm so happy that you're here to like really give some nuance for discussion, because I think it'll be really, really useful. So April 2022, of course, Elon Musk signed a contract to buy Twitter. He alleged that Twitter misled him about the size of its user base and the prevalence of automated accounts known as bots. He backed out in July completely, and then Twitter sued him in the Delaware Chancery Court. Mm-hmm. Trial is scheduled for October 17th, as far as I'm aware, but now there's maybe possibly some movement. I don't know.
It is still scheduled.
Still scheduled. And the court is not going to move that unless the parties file something to say, hey, look, we've reached an agreement on this and we've decided not to move ahead to trial. The judge is always going to be, if there's an 11th hour sort of agreement, the judge is going to say, unless something is filed in the docket, I'm moving forward. You guys better be prepared Monday morning to get started.
Right.
So what happened recently is, well, I guess for a little bit more context, there have been a number of motions to compel that I've become aware of. In this case, Elon Musk is supposed to be handing over a ton of text messages and DMs and other.
We've seen some of those text messages already. They've been hilarious.
Those are public. Excellent.
Yeah.
But apparently it hasn't been all of them. They haven't even really given full assurances that they've been
not
given.
Really how Elon rolls in discovery.
Everything.
I figured this out over covering this. Haven't been a big Elon follower. He is let's say he's an aggressive interpreter of the court's directives.
And the SEC's directives.
Yeah.
And
I did know that one. Yeah. He doesn't believe in directives so much. And so, yes, the court was growing increasingly irritated with him, which I think is one of the driving factors with what happened this last week.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of that stuff is out there. If you're interested in what Joe Rogan tweeted to Elon Musk on the day he announced he was buying Twitter, it is there for you. So have that.
And it turns out that the billionaires text just like we do.
I think I punctuate more than the billionaires, but yes.
So now he's recently, apparently, supposedly offered again to buy Twitter after all. And this is either, I can't tell if this is a delay tactic, if it's a bona fide offer to actually buy it, or if he's just doing it for the lols, because this is someone who like literally does that. Like he tweets about Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin, takes a nosedive and crashes, and he does these things for the lols. So I wouldn't be surprised if he did stuff like that for publicity stunts as well on something like this. What do you guys think about this latest this latest offer to buy Twitter? Do you think it's real, or do you think it's not?
I think he's an insane person if it's not real. I mean, like, he's sitting in front of the Court of Chancery. The Court of Chancery will hold him to the damn thing as a condition of agreeing to the settlement. So on the other hand, I definitely think he's doing it for the lols. I just think he's going to buy Twitter and spend $44 billion for the lols and not just tweet about it.
I'm a little bit surprised that apparently he offered full value.
Yep.
When I read the original complaints, I thought that Twitter had the better end of it. And I thought that, that Elon didn't, because the problem was,
bless you.
Excuse me. The problem was that it seemed like he knew about the bot problem, and that he was buying it specifically with respect to the bot problem. It's like, the problem is the bots. I will fix the bots. I will make it all better. And then he says, oh, I'm really surprised by how many bots there are. I didn't know how many bots there are. This doesn't really make sense. Right? You can't, on the one hand, say, I know I'm buying the thing because of the defect, and oh my God, the defect. It's like, that doesn't really work. So I thought his original case was not so great. It got a little bit better in sort of the filings later on, at least in my opinion, at least in part because of this internal whistleblower. I was like, okay, maybe that's something that we can work with as some sort of externality that might help in some way. But it's still problematic, but it's at least better. But I'm a little bit surprised that if the settlement is, I just give you everything you want, because in some senses, why not just chance it in the court of chancery, right?
If that's going to be your ultimate,
if it's like, I'm just going to give you everything you want, why not just chance it? Because they literally can't order me to do anything more than that.
The answer to that.
I think really. There's something in those text messages he doesn't want to handle.
He's just concerned about the discovery.
Testimony. The answer is testimony. The answer is actually having to go under oath on this stuff.
I don't know. I think Twitter has equally interesting exposure possibilities.
Yeah, but they're getting the hell out. Like, they're willing to go and burn themselves down because they're getting 54.20 on their shares, and you never have to see me again because I'm going to go drink Mai Tais on the island I just bought. So that's different from Elon, who has to continue operating both Tesla and Twitter. And I have no idea what is in his closet, but I think his lawyers told him that it looked like a less than 50-50 proposition. At the end of the day, you're going to pay for the whole thing. And I think, he got through the director's approval and the stockholders' approval without anybody even really asking about him, because they were fighting against the litigation so hard. And then he says, fine, I'll buy it. And like, the reports are, I might buy it by Friday. It's like, I have that money. So it's like, okay, well, if he owns Twitter by the weekend, then the one thing he accomplished is that he avoided what would be the in-depth think piece, chin-stroking articles on Elon owning Twitter before he actually takes ownership.
No, he didn't. There's still going to be just as many chin-stroking articles as there ever was.
After he owns it. The issue was in terms of the interregnum period. Look, I don't think he's a genius. I think he's an idiot on this stuff. And I think he finally decided to just close up shop and offer the full money. I don't think he's trying to play games with the court, because that would be insane. But I'm also not discounting the fact that a bunch of the things he has done, I would characterize as insane. But if he goes in there with a bluffing strategy to move the court and he doesn't go through with it, the court is going to obliterate him. And he has to know that.
What is rule number one of litigation? Don't piss off the court.
Right. And he's already been doing that either through his parties or himself directly. It is clear that in the interactions in the discovery phase with the letter exchanges, that Twitter has at least presented itself as the more straight arrow actor, the one that is listening to the court directives. Elon Musk is constantly trying to avoid various aspects of the discovery in a way that I thought looked very untoward. And the Court of Chancery in the latest hearing seemed to suggest that that was in fact the case. Once you know you've lost the court, then maybe you just say, let's not even go through with it. 5420, I agree. I would not have expected him to come back with the exact same thing that he left with, because all of this is pointless. Huge amounts of legal fees, huge amounts of consternation, and just overall decrease in the value of the asset.
The legal fees are nothing compared to the $44 billion. I mean, I know that lawyers are expensive. They're not $44 billion expensive. The legal fees are a trifling error of coins left in the couch compared to $44 billion.
Have you seen the signatories on his letter?
Yes.
I agree that it's not billions of dollars, but it is millions. Millions still count.
Ooh.
Oh, all right. You say ooh, but if I were to show up at your house with whatever Skadden's bill is for this, you'd be pretty happy.
Yes, I'd also, if you showed up to my house with $44 billion, I'd happily pay it.
So here's
$5 million in light of $44 billion. That's like what, 1/2000th? So okay, yeah, okay. Oh, I'm so scared.
So here's a question. So we're talking about the world's richest man, and when we're talking about these kind of discovery motions, these legal fees, all of this stuff, for most people, these are limiting factors that are going to guide their behavior. And sanctions are something that most people generally want to avoid, right? Like sanctions, like that's like the worst thing possible for in most litigation contexts, right? Like I have as a litigator never had to actually deal with sanctions. I've never gotten to the point of actually having to ask for sanctions from the other side or having to give up sanctions from our side, because that's always like the threat that looms over, like, okay, are we going to work this out, this dispute right here, or are we not going to? And so like that's usually the ultimate motivating factor in a lot of these discovery disputes. But for him, it seems like it doesn't really mean anything.
No,
so
I might have to pay their attorney's fees too. Ooh, I might have to pay another $5 million. Wherever will I find the money?
So my question is, how do you motivate a billionaire to actually like move forward and in a reasonable, rational kind of way in this kind of a context, if like the normal things that like most people would be limited or motivated by just don't compute?
One, I think you become pretty happy that he's mostly concerned with cars and Twitter and not using all of those assets for some other purpose. But two, I think you're exactly right. You look at his interactions with the SEC, which is an agency with considerable power to make your life miserable. I don't know that I've ever seen anything like it. He's just like, whatever. The SEC is wrong. Oh, they fined me another $5 million, whatever. And they're wrong. And I'm going to continue to talk about why they're wrong, which is against their own gag order. And they'll find me again. And he's making a point out of things like that, interactions like that. He's trying to make a freedom of speech point. Twitter is arguably a freedom of speech point. I don't know that anybody should be like super thrilled about it in terms of Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter. It might be great. It might be awful. I don't see him as a business genius on this stuff. He sees a problem with Twitter and decides to go after this. We'll see what happens there. But I don't know that you can control it. Outside of criminal sanctions, outside of actually taking things away or using cages, and I don't think anything that he's done has risen to that level that I can see, then I don't think monetary fines are the same kind of thing. Now, you can look to have statutory fine limits that instead of being like $250K, have some kind of percentage based on assets and things like that. But I mean, I don't know that him mouthing off to the SEC should be something that makes an SEC windfall of $3 billion. So, I mean, like, you have different considerations in terms of how these things should all work.
Yeah. Yeah. Kurt, what do you think?
I don't really have anything super intelligent to say. I mean, if you have the kind of money that Elon Musk has, you know, the normal sanctions that are available are nothing but a trifle. So you don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess not.
It's good to have $240 billion, I guess.
Well, there was an open, honest discussion about if he loses in the Court of Chancery and they order him to pay $44 billion to Twitter. What if he doesn't? The court doesn't have an army, and Delaware knows that. Delaware was going to be faced with a question of like, what? This would be the most public kind of scofflawing in corporate American history. And there was a real risk that he goes, all right, no.
This would be a legitimate question, right? Like what happens? I've never encountered, I mean, none of us have, right? None of us have ever represented a billionaire before, or like the world's,
well, you can hold them in contempt, and then you can try to like wheel around for these kinds of things. But in terms of the court abhors like equitable action anyway. Like we don't like forcing people to do things. Delaware Court of Chancery is at least a little bit different because they view everybody that appears in front of them as sophisticated parties that knew what they were getting into when they signed these things. And so they are less reluctant to order somebody to spend money, someone to do something with their corporation and those kinds of things. But like just an absolute national no is not really what you see. So that would have been an interesting kind of crisis of court power. That
I guess we could send out writs of attachment and go into the Tesla factories and start taking out.
I think you'd see that. You'd start to see cross-state judicial orders.
That's what you'd have to do. You'd have to go in and you'd have to just start seizing stuff.
Right. Well, and then he moves everything out of country. I mean, like there's all sorts of things that could happen at that point in time. But there was a risk that he would do that because of the money he has and because
his bank accounts. If they're in the United States, seize control of his bank accounts. I don't know.
But most of his wealth probably isn't in a bank anyway.
That's true. It's all stock. That's fair.
Yeah, and you could liquidate his Tesla stock, but then you're potentially crushing a company that has a lot of innocent actors with it. I mean, like you've got all sorts of interesting questions there. Honestly, him doing this is probably a breath of relief to like huge numbers of people. Now, if he games it again, all hell breaks loose. I mean, honestly, it does.
I'm going into his house and taking his hand towels. That's the real punishment.
If he is gaming this to get a delay in the court case and backs out of it somehow, like literally all hell breaks loose. So that'll be fun. Watch it on Virtual Legality. But outside of that, nobody's happy.
It's good for your channel.
Is it just me, or does it feel like is this a dumb take? But there's like on some level, it seems like this is almost like the Brooks case with the sovereign citizen who's like representing himself, trying to get like doing all these crazy things to try to get delays in that case. Doesn't it have like a weird, it's like they're on like two polar ends of the spectrum, but like somehow there seems to be a weird, maybe it's more of a U shape.
If Brooks had $240 billion, then yeah. Yeah, a little bit.
Oh, I think Elon thinks he's a sovereign citizen. It's just of a different ilk.
Fair.
He doesn't think the SEC applies to him. He doesn't think
probably.
He's rich, so we use the term eccentric, and that makes it better.
He clearly doesn't think a lot of the regulatory authority applies to him. So
crazy. Well, speaking of people who don't think that the rules apply to them, heyo, and for another segue, let's talk about Alec Baldwin.
Your segues.
These segues are fantastic.
Legalbytes has the best segues.
Thank you. I've been learning who has really good segues. Was it Nate? I think that typically has like really, really good segues. I started taking notes and I was like, I need to do better at that.
Now all you need to do is the lightest text tip thing and now the segue to our sponsor. And speaking of blah blah blah, something tea, Dragon's Treasure, roll the ad.
Fair point.
Speaking of Alec Baldwin, do you have rust in your garden? We have treatments for that.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. So Alec Baldwin, of course, we all know very well about this case, but in case there's anybody new, almost a year ago, they were filming on set in New Mexico, the movie Rust. Alec Baldwin was preparing for a scene that involved a cross draw with a not a rifle, but a gun, we'll say. I'll just limit it to gun. Because I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that'll be like very specific about it's a revolver, right?
It is a revolver.
A revolver. Thank you. Okay. I know about guns, but not like other people in law tube know about guns, like yourself,
A
Kurt.
single action revolver, nonetheless. If we want
Fair point.
It's
There
all
you
good,
go.
Alita. I would have gone with handgun, so it's fine.
So anyway, so he pulls it out, gun goes off. It passes through the cinematographer, Halyna Hutchins, and then hits Joel Souza, the director. He's injured. She dies. Now there's all kinds of litigation, possible criminal charges to be filed. We talked about this last week with the DA specifically naming Alec Baldwin and three other mystery people, and basically saying, yep, we're preparing to file these charges and pursue criminal charges against 4 individuals, potentially asking for some big money, getting about half of it for those legal fees to actually put on the case. And there was at the same time reporting about Alec Baldwin selling his Hamptons home, which was, I don't know, I can't remember how many millions of dollars, but basically it looked like, and this was after he had already sold another home, so it looked like he was signaling for the basically the idea that he was going to be spending a lot of money on legal fees. Like that's what it looked like, is that he was preparing to go to trial in a criminal case potentially. But turns out it might be for something else, because the case that was filed by Halyna Hutchins' husband, Matthew Hutchins, her widowed husband and family, I suppose it wasn't just him, their son also was a plaintiff on the case. They settled the case against Alec Baldwin and a number of producers on that case, for wrongful death and all kinds of stuff. So they just settled. They put out a press release this week talking about how first off, the fact that there's a press release coming out about this settlement is interesting. You don't get that with every lawsuit, right? What are you guys, first off, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
This whole thing is icky. The press release uses the widower to quote that he doesn't hold anybody responsible. The payments that are mentioned in the article are insurance proceeds and profits from the film, and not direct out-of-pocket expenses, which you might
Profits
mention.
from what film?
The film that is now again in production in Rust.
It's going to start filming in January 2023 again, according to reports on the
So you get a certain amount of...
With whom? Is Alec Baldwin still in this thing?
Everybody.
Yep.
Everybody. I believe that the article makes the really wrong-headed quote in like the third paragraph with saying something along the lines of, with all principal players that were involved in production to begin with. Well, I'm like, well, not one of them.
Except for one.
I think the article also, the one that I read, I don't know which one you are reading, Alita, but I think I was reading mine in Variety, has a section, what I picked up too. Has a section that says, I believe it's Gutierrez Reed does not appear to be a party to the settlement, who is the armorer, and was a party to the lawsuit. So it would appear they've picked their fall gal in this case. And there's a whole lot about this in terms of the widower and the director saying, I'm just excited to get back out there doing it and representing what Ms. Hutchins would want to believe in. I said on my show earlier this morning, I said, my God, if I get shot making a movie, please don't finish it and think that you are honoring me in some way. And I don't, it's all icky. Like, I don't want to tell this person who's had this tragedy happen in their life how to feel about this, whether to sell out, whether to want to be done with litigation, however it happened, whatever is happening behind the scenes. I'm not going to tell him how to feel or how to act. But from us on the outside, the feel, the smell, the absolute just aura of this article is that these are Hollywood people that needed to get their movie done. And my God, are they going to get their movie done, hell or high water? And it's like,
that is exactly how it feels. That is exactly how it feels. Was that it was like the priority was finish the movie, like whatever deal we have to strike, just finish the movie so the project gets done. Sorry, Kurt, you were going to say.
No, that's fine. I was just going to comment that if they are taking as part of the settlement proceeds from the movie, that seems to implicitly build in some assumptions. Those assumptions being, for example, that Alec Baldwin will not be criminally prosecuted. Because one would imagine his criminal prosecution alone might, for example, hurt ticket sales, let alone convicted. And so it also seems to build in the premise that movie goers are not going to care about this whenever this film winds up coming out, in a year or whatever it winds up being, if they're going to refilm everything, which I would imagine they would. And also Hollywood accounting. And I hope someone remembered to build that into the settlement, because it's like, oh, we'll take a percentage of the net. Well, there is no net. There never is. So I have many concerns, practical, and it seems to build in some assumptions that are very uncomfortable. So
yeah.
Well, they made the widower an executive producer.
Now that is the detail that is most interesting to me, because to me that does several things on a practical level. It realigns his interests financially with theirs, so that the success of the movie is also his success. It's his success in getting his settlement. As for the criminal case, that means how much would he be actively pushing for the criminal case? How much is he going to be participating with the DA and their criminal charges of Alec Baldwin or someone else? If he, if that means putting the star of the movie that he's going to get his settlement, that his settlement is tied to, the star of the movie for that is going to potentially go to jail. Like, he's not going to be in favor of that, because then that means that he doesn't win the settlement.
I think that's the purpose. Yeah.
And then number two, in the court of public opinion, they can say to all of the people that are basically disgusted by this whole thing, they can say, well, you know what? This is honoring her. This is the family is benefiting from this. They are completely on board. They are so on board to the extent that they are executive producers. So you know what? Don't abstain from seeing this movie just because you don't like what happened, because if you do that, you will harm the family. Doing that,
at this point,
staying away, not buying a ticket harms the family, because that's
I'm comfortable
money that goes to the settlement.
At this point, I'm comfortable with harming the family. If they're going to put their lot in with these people, then they can take on all that bad will. As far as I'm concerned, they've chosen their alignment and betrayed their family member, and they can eat it.
Harsh.
Man, I don't know if I'm willing to go that far, though, because I not being a party to the negotiation and what the discussions were like, I don't know what was on the table for the family of Halyna Hutchins to come away with in the first place, right? Because if they were just like, hey, look, like, this is a crappy situation no matter what, obviously there's death. And then on top of that, then there's litigation and grief litigation, like, all of this is just a huge mess to be dealing with all at the same time, just from like on an emotional level. Then there's the practical level of like, we just like kind of want to resolve this so that we can move on with our lives. It may very well be that the only offerings that they got from the other side involved something with them sort of tying their interests in that regard.
I'm sure that was the offer,
no
but
doubt.
they're the ones that said yes. They're ones said, yes, I want to tie my lot in with the people who killed my spouse through their wanton negligence and their knowing, conscious disregard of ongoing safety issues. And I'm doing it for money. It's like, how much blood money do you want? Apparently, yes, please, was the answer to that question.
Well, you're suing. We can frame it however we want. If you're suing them for money. That's a civil action. You're suing them for blood money. It's just a matter of what you settled for at that point in time, right? So, if this is the way that gets you the most money, I don't know that we can just strictly file the widower under, skis ball, because this was always about money. You can't bring them back. We don't have necromantic skills in the legal system yet.
Right.
To me, I agree, Kurt. I understand your instinct entirely. My instinct reading that article is, my dude, really? So, I get that. I then like logically I say, well, it's not really fair for me to put myself in those shoes. But it's clear to me that the producers and Alec Baldwin are acting like skis balls. And I would argue that the reason they're doing it now with that DA financing leak happening is that they want to be able to make the argument, not even to the public. That's going to matter ultimately if they sell this movie, but in general to the DA and to the public, talking about the criminal charges that are potentially pending. That like, why would you even do this, New Mexico? Because the husband is on board. The kid is on board because he was a plaintiff to the lawsuit. Not that work should hold 9-year-olds to, thinking properly on these kinds of things. But like, who are you, public? Yes. But who are you, DA, to say that you should be harming these people more? What is the purpose of that? This was an accident. It's a terrible accident. But we came to an agreement. What is your interest? And I said this on my show, which is, well,
faithful application of the law. And right, the law applies equally to everyone. How about that for an answer?
And that's what the DA answers. Now, I also said the DA was that's what DAs answer. That's not really how it works. But that the state can still have an interest in saying, well, we don't want people waving guns around on our movie sets. And that's still an interest, regardless of how the two impacted parties feel about what happened in a given situation. But I mean, we can be cynical as long as we're being cynical, right? We can be cynical about the producers. We can be cynical about the widower, potentially. We can be cynical about the DA. You could have freaking Alec Baldwin on the top line of your criminal prosecution that you just got 6 figures plus for to bring in your office, that everybody is going to be able to pronounce all twice at the end of all of this. If you bring this action, you want to be cynical. That's part of it as well. This is a DA's golden ticket. If they choose to pursue it, which is the other reason why the settlement exists, is because that's the way the producers are going to want to frame it. If there is charging against the producers, including Alec Baldwin, they're going to want to say, this is just a political move by someone that doesn't care about the family that we've already negotiated.
And also doesn't care about that sweet, sweet Hollywood money, because we're going to pull our productions out of New Mexico.
Well, they probably won't add that directly in the press release about that, because it makes it ickier. But they will say, this is just an aggrandizing politician who doesn't care about you or the citizenry or anything else. And they'll bring the widower up to talk about how this was an accident and blame shouldn't be ascribed and these kinds of things. And they will try to move public opinion on it. Like that is what's going to happen.
Well, because also, like, I mean, even if think about it here now, let's say the DA actually does press charges and there is a criminal trial. Alec Baldwin is the defendant. And of course, Matthew Hutchins becomes one of the witnesses that gets called upon to the stand. Like that's natural, right?
Because how is he a witness?
Yeah, I mean,
you've got the aggrieved family member.
Yeah, but he's not a witness. He's not a witness. He might be available in some sort of sentencing phase. But he's not a witness to anything.
He's on the set the day of. He would at least be able to talk about what he was, the tenor of the thing.
Fine.
And generally speaking, and can talk about like who she was and and when she left to go to the production, all that kind of. There is stuff that he could talk about.
They'll work him in, Kurt. They will.
Yeah, of course. So I'm imagining already right now the cross-examination.
Because how much you're getting paid, is definitely one of my questions I'm asking.
Yes, I can see Elaine asking it right now.
Right, okay? But the even before that point though is cross-examination by Alec Baldwin's attorney saying, so you settled a case, you filed a civil case against them. Yes. You settled that case. Yeah. And when you settled it, you came out with a statement that says you don't hold anyone harmless. You personally don't think that he should be held responsible, do you? According to this statement, that can be used against the prosecution.
Yep.
I mean, whether or not the jury finds that compelling or not is another story, but that's something that would come out. That's a tool in the toolbox, so to speak.
Right. I mean, that's off law. I mean, the thing that Alec Baldwin is facing, which is the real problem for him, is he's got an FBI report that says he pulled the trigger. He absolutely aimed it at the person because that's the only way these things can work. So that almost certainly leads to negligent use of a firearm in New Mexico with a death that comes out of it. And so it leads directly into their
involuntary manslaughter with a firearm, which also is an enhancement.
It's not a tricky set of elements to bring against him.
Not really.
So that's what he's facing. And they're trying to get out in front of it. I mean, like that's what's happening here. And I think they're trying to throw Gutierrez Reed to the dogs. Like that is what is also happening, is this, 24-year-old armorer on a set that has all sorts of articles written about safety protocols and failures in financing and putting people in houses and things. They're trying to throw this armorer that may or may not have been qualified, that was hired by them to do this job, to the absolute wolves. I mean, like, this will be a wonderful, HBO show at some point that you won't even believe is true, except that for the fact that somebody died. And so this is as nakedly disgusting as I'm used to seeing from Hollywood acting in public on these kinds of things. And you can see their motivations the whole way. I'm not, again, lawyer hat. I'm not saying they're doing anything wrong if you can convince the other guy to settle.
If
and
the
get
prosecutor's campaign financing suddenly becomes extremely well funded, I might be a little bit suspicious.
I think I think at least before yesterday she was inclined to go through with it. I think probably, if I were betting,
you can totally see a statement from the prosecutor saying, "Well, since the family seems to be okay with it, I mean, I don't think it's in the public interest to prosecute it this time."
I can absolutely see
also, that. I'll need about $3 million for my next campaign.
Well, that would be bribery. I mean, certainly that kind of thing doesn't happen.
No.
We'll see.
Well, so anyway, we'll definitely see if these criminal charges end up materializing, but I don't know. I'm so on the fence as to whether or not I think we're going to see any criminal charges at this point. That definitely throws a massive wrench into that whole process, I think.
I think Gutierrez Reed's getting one.
Yeah. She may be the one holding the bag after all of this, it seems.
I mean, you guys are the married people in this group. So I'll ask you respectively, how do you think your spouse would feel about it if you guys were killed on an intercept? Huh?
I thought you were saying we were just happy, married.
Like Merry Christmas?
The married.
Married. No, you guys are the married ones. People. No, I'm asking you, if it were you that were dead, how would your spouses react? Do you think that they take the money and say, I hold no ill will? Is that their reaction?
It's impossible to say. I mean, look, talking from the grave, my advice would be like, if they gave you enough and you didn't want to deal with litigation, I don't care. You honor me. I'm not going to, I don't give a crap. And I don't give a crap what people on YouTube say about you. So, you do what's right for the fam. I don't know. I'm with you, Kurt, saying this looks skeezy from the widower. It does. But that's all we've got. And I can't promise you that litigation would have been successful. I can't promise you that, they didn't have stuff that would have suggested that, I don't know. Alec Baldwin in his interview was saying, well, she had him aim it at her and that she was constantly unsafe and she was a problem on the set. And like whatever comes out in a litigation on those kinds of grounds. So I don't know the whole set of affairs there, but I will tell you, if something like that were to happen to me, I would tell my spouse, I would tell my family, if they got offered a good enough bag to take it, hell or high water, I don't care. That's not about me.
Same. But, and I will say this, having worked in trust and estates, I've talked about this a bit before, but I've worked in the context of litigation and grief where people are grieving the loss of usually it's their like elderly parents. And then also in the process of litigating where that estate goes, whether it's between them and siblings or between the siblings together and some new interloper that married dad after mom died. Like there's all kinds of like interesting ways that these cases can come about. But people react in so many different ways with grief. People handle grief very, very differently depending on who you are. And remember, Matthew Hutchins is also a big law attorney too. So he may also be, and this is not necessarily the case that like lawyers are always going to be more rational than your average person when it comes to litigation. That's definitely not the case, but it could very well be here that, he's dealt enough with law and understanding, when to separate emotions from logic, and being able to just say, you know what, this is going to be the best deal possible, and I'm going to move forward with it, even if it doesn't feel all that great. But I'm going to do what I can to move forward with my family. Could be that.
Okay, an unexpected answer, but I'll take it.
So
I'll say this. I have to just to speak for my spouse just a bit. I can't promise you she'd do anything that I just recommended there. In fact, I doubt it very much. but like, I'm telling you how I would feel. Now I'm in the grave, right? Go get your money. Nothing can be done.
You're not the one that's grieving.
No, right. Nothing can be done to me anymore. I was shot by Alec Baldwin. So, go get your bag. But the spouses are going to react differently, I would say, than what would be my recommendation from the beyond.
Probably. Yeah. Probably. Let me get a few super chats real quick, and then we'll go on to the next subject. So 2012 Jameson says, I support Texas Law Act like a publisher, number 230. Thanks for the super chat. I know that Texas law is going to be interesting to see where it goes. I don't know. I know you guys disagree. So I haven't looked at it closely enough to really have any material thoughts on it.
It sounds like Richard and I need to have a stream on it.
I mean, sure. I mean, I'm just going to say it's going to get absolutely crushed by the Supreme Court if it comes to it.
I'm not so sure.
Okay.
So Ginger Haynes, thanks so much for the super chat, says, I agree you have the right to free speech, but you don't have the right to actively call for violence just because it offended you. Put your big kid pants on and stop being a Karen. I don't know the details of what happened with Nick's channel.
Do you think that's a Nick
previously? I think so. I think that probably is.
So I've never known Nick to actively call for violence.
But I like I said, I don't know. I haven't been paying attention to his content. So
it could be Nick, could be the person against Nick. I mean,
I'm gonna take a punt and assume that didn't happen.
The way that this is written, I don't know if this is talking about Nick or talking about the people that went after Nick, and what kind of violence you're talking about. But like metaphorical violence or like actual literal violence, I'm not sure. But I would tend to agree with this, with the general policy of what the super chat is saying.
What if my actual name is Karen? Like, I feel bad for people that are actually named one of these internet memes. That just seems like a bummer.
Yeah, I do agree.
The name has been dropping in popularity for a reason.
Yeah, but I know plenty of nice Karens. I wouldn't like it if this suddenly became Rick. I mean, that wouldn't be fun.
Yeah.
Change my name, go by nickname.
Agreed.
Cash money, whatever.
Agreed. Secret Mix Squirrel, thanks for the super chat. Says, hey, you watching? Please hit that like button. Thanks so much. And thanks for being a wonderful mod, and shout out to the mods. Generally speaking, you guys are doing a fantastic job of helping to moderate this chat today, as you do always. So I always really appreciate it. So let's go to the last one. Now we've got the Brangelina divorce papers. So they have been in this divorce proceeding since 2016, and it is still ongoing. And whether you believe Brad Pitt or whether you believe Angelina Jolie depends on your perspective. For me personally, I'm just kind of looking at this, and I don't know either of them personally. I wasn't there at any of these events. So just like any of these cases that we're talking about, I always am going to start coming at it from a neutral perspective. I know that not all of the Twitter personalities out there, I'm looking at you, Miss Dauber, think that we actually think that way. They just want to assume that we're going to immediately villainize Angelina Jolie, but I have zero interest in doing that. So I just wanted to say that.
We don't need to bring crazy people into this discation, do we?
I mean,
you're only saying that because she's a woman. Dun, dun, dun.
I didn't even gender my response at all.
So anyway, I want to say that because it's like I always want to be clear that we're coming at this from a very neutral perspective, and I think that so far we've been doing that. I know, Kurt, last time you were on here, we went through the cross complaint that was filed in this by Nouvelle LLC. This is Angelina Jolie's investment company, or I guess technically former. I think she like recently sold it, but it's coming from her perspective. So I remember going through it. Well, before I talk about that, let me talk about the basic case here. So this whole case is, I mean, obviously there's the divorce that's underlying all of this, but this specific case was started by Brad Pitt. He filed a complaint and then a First Amendment complaint over the division of Chateau Merival, which is a vineyard that is overseas in Europe. And the two of them bought together in 2008. They shared the cost of the vineyard, and in the course of their divorce, obviously they're trying to figure out what to do with this asset, how to split it up, who gets what. There is a dispute as to how that is supposed to happen. Brad Pitt has filed his case primarily because Angelina Jolie ultimately sold her interest to the Stoli Group, to a subsidiary of Stoli, the vodka company, which Brad Pitt characterizes as Russian oligarchs. That may or may not be true. I haven't personally verified that, but that's just like the way that he describes them is Russian oligarchs. And I know that that's a buzzword these days because of global other global issues that are happening right now. Oligarchs are generally not a term that is favorably received by many people. And so I think that there might be a reason why he's using that other than just a general descriptor. But basically, he says, look, I was supposed to get the first right of refusal before she sold her interest to anyone, because I shouldn't be forced to do business with someone else that I don't agree to work with. Or at least I should have some kind of a heads up. Now, his claim is for an implied contract. There's no actual written agreement between the two of them for these terms. So his claims are admittedly a little bit weak on that front.
What's this interest worth?
Oh, millions. I don't know the specific number, but it's definitely millions.
Yeah,
because
you might have a jurisdictional contract issue if it's worth that much. It's not written down.
Sure. I mean,
one would imagine this is going to be governed by the laws of France.
I can't speak to them.
I think it's actually Luxembourg, because Luxembourg law has been coming up quite a bit, even though I think the vineyard is actually in France. I think that I can't remember exactly how it came up, but either their agreement was under Luxembourg law, or there was a corporate entity that they had formed at some point that was in Luxembourg. So Luxembourg comes into this. So there's a number of different jurisdictions here that kind of layer into one another, but all of this is playing out in California court because the divorce is happening in California court, and you've got two parties that are from California. So basically that's what he says is that essentially she was supposed to give him first right of refusal, but she was vindictive, and so she decided to go off and do this whole thing. Now she came back with her cross complaint by Nouvelle. Technically, it wasn't the first one; wasn't by her; it was by Nouvelle, the company that sort of represented her in this whole agreement. And Kurt, remind me your thoughts on that. It wasn't particularly impressive, right?
No, not especially.
Yeah. And specifically because she points to the fact that she was doing a lot of humanitarian work, and then he was working on the business out of Chateau Merival, and then at some point she wanted to come back and play a part in it, and then he basically froze her out.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like from the complaint and the response by Angelina Jolie's own admission in a lot of ways that she was not particularly involved in the business itself, and it was more Brad Pitt's deal, and he was the one that was investing at least sweat equity into the actual construction and development of the business. So she seemed to, by her own admission, not be particularly involved. which
Yeah.
goes a long way to also why she wanted to sell. Also, apparently, because she apparently decided at one point that she doesn't want to deal with alcohol anymore on apparently a moral level or something, suddenly for no particular reason, which is a
So
little odd.
yeah. So I will say that there's a new cross complaint that was just filed this week by actually Angelina Jolie this time, not by Novell, but or any other entity, but by her as a defendant, or I guess across plaintiff. And so she basically goes through a different narrative here, and I will say that the facts that she lays them out are a bit more, I don't know, satisfactory, I guess, than the first one. I'll
Okay.
give a brief summary real quick, and then we can look at the actual document itself. So she says they bought the Chateau Merival together jointly. He immediately wrested control, despite the fact that she usually plays an active role in furnishing the place that she lives in. Initially, Chateau Merival was supposed to be the place their family lived and basically had their own personal winery, but not so much a business. As soon as he wrested control, however, that's like where he basically started to like want to turn it into a major business, and he had like all of these designs on what he wanted to do with the place. And so she basically was kind of like put off to the side essentially. So she then juggled her responsibilities between Chateau Merival, raising the kids, her career, and her humanitarian work. And so her career eventually took a back seat. And she basically said, all right, this is Chateau Merival is your deal. I'm focusing on the kids and the humanitarian work because you're not really letting me participate anyway.
Okay.
Then there's the whole 2016 plane incident that has been widely reported, where they were on a private plane with the whole family, the kids, her, Brad, Angelina, and they were going from Chateau Merival to California. And she alleges in great detail about him being very, very drunk on the plane, pouring beer and wine on her and the kids, grabbing her by the hair, all kinds of stuff, and just basically beating her and at least one of the other kids up on the plane. Violence, physical violence. This is what they talk about. So she says that she immediately decided to file for divorce. And then through the process of the divorce, he claims all the properties that they own. And so her main asset was her interest in Chateau Merival, because she says at sort of towards the beginning that she had placed basically most of her net worth in the purchase of Chateau Merival. So this is most of what she has is this place. So because of that, because of him saying these other properties are mine and Chateau Merival is the only asset that she seems to have an interest in, according to the cross complaint, of course, I don't know one way or another whether this is true. These are all allegations in the cross complaint. She says that she decided to take a more active role in Chateau Merival because of all of that, but Brad Pitt wouldn't allow it and then froze her out. So she tried to sell her share to Brad Pitt initially, even though she says that she wasn't under any obligation to do so, but says that he was requiring an agreement from her not to go public about the alleged domestic violence incident that was on her and on the kids. So eventually that agreement fell through, and instead she sold to the Stoli people, and then that's what brought his complaint. So that's her version of what happened here, which is different from his version. I don't know. What do you guys have any thoughts on that so far?
No, it sounds a lot more interesting that she was squeezed out. And so that so we have this more tyrant king idea. It's like, it will be my winery. I don't need you, woman, kind of vibe to it, which sounds a lot more plausible rather than, just going, I went off to do my own humanitarian thing, which in some way, but it does somewhat undercut her claims to the humanitarian thing, because now it makes her involvement in the humanitarian efforts less an act of pure charity on her part and more because, at least in part, she was compelled to, because because the implication would necessarily be, right, I would be more involved but for him squeezing me out, so therefore I would be doing more of that and less of the charity work. So I was doing the charity work only because I had no other choice. So it makes her actions a little bit less pure, so it makes her motives a little bit more conflicted, but other than that.
Well, I don't think that she says it quite like that. And maybe that's just because of the way that I summarized it, but she basically seems to indicate that she was already doing the humanitarian work and raising the kids, and those were things that she really cared about. And that working on Chateau Merival was just sort of like a point of contention, so she kind of gave that up along with, all of these other responsibilities that she was already undertaking. So, I don't know. Rick, what are your thoughts on this?
I can never tell when you have big fighting legal documents on these kinds of things. It's one of the ways that I came into the Depp Heard trial is, all right, I want to see these people. I want to hear what they have to say. I want to put this together in my own head. It's why I think the trial system is actually pretty effective for bringing in people that aren't otherwise confused about this stuff. I had not heard of domestic violence accusations before just hearing them from you. So I might not have been paying attention enough, honestly. I don't know this case very well. But that was news to me. Obviously that's a big bullet point. If you can, show that in some way. Obviously we do have to be cautious about what accusations are and say alleged all the time until we get a little bit more understanding. But I don't have any great insight on it because it sounds like a pretty contentious proceeding that has a lot of different facets to it. The only thing I would add is if you're going to talk about moving multiple $1 million of equity interests in companies around, at least use a cocktail napkin. I'm put something down.
I'm
I
amazed.
know it's your spouse, but just a little something.
I'm absolutely amazed that there was nothing. And there was discussion about it though. So let me show you. Let me show you the cross complaint here. So here's the dispute. Starting with Chateau Merival. In April 2008, Jolie used a substantial portion of her personal net worth to co-purchase with Pitt their family home and vineyard known as Chateau Merival. As part of the negotiations to purchase the property, Jolie's business manager and transactional lawyer both advised that Jolie and Pitt should enter into an agreement delineating how each of them could sell their interest in Chateau Merival if their relationship ended.
I've had that conversation. That's a good transaction lawyer. Props to you.
Yep. That's a conversation that needed to happen. Where did it go? Let's find out. In a January 2008 email, Jolie's business manager wrote, "A separate agreement should be created between you and Pitt, which outlines how the property will be liquidated. If something happens to your relationship, i.e., is the property sold? Do one or both of you have the right to buy the other one out? If so, how is the price reached for the buyout, etc., etc."
Seriously,
Jolie,
we could write a shotgun buy sell in an hour. You talk about not legal time.
Yeah, for sure. Jolie responded to the email by advising her business manager to talk to Warren Grant, Pitt's business manager. On January 11th, 2008, Jolie's business manager then forwarded this email string to Grant with the message, "Let's discuss." So what happened? What happened with these discussions with Pitt's side? According to Jolie here in the cross complaint, Jolie's and Pitt's representatives discussed the issue, and on April 30th, 2008, just 8 days before the purchase of Chateau Merival, Grant delivered Pitt's definitive rejection of any such agreement. He wrote, "Early in the process, I raised the issue of a buy-sell agreement between A and B, but was told by Brad it wasn't necessary for two reasonable people to have such an agreement." Again, I looked to Terry and Robert. Yep. That's a face palm from Rick right there.
Oh, yeah. Well, because I've heard this conversation before as well, right? So I do entrepreneur stuff. I do founder stuff. I sometimes deal with couples that have small businesses and things like that. And one of the things, it's like a prenup sometimes. It's like, well, we really should thought experiment out. And I'm sure your marriage is great. What if it isn't at some point?
Right.
Yeah. And that's always, you gotta put your diplomatic hat on, but yeah, that's the pitch. It's like, this is way more difficult to unwind if we don't do this. But sometimes you get that. I can absolutely see Brad Pitt or Brad Pitt's attorney going like, "Oh no, we're in this together for the long run. We don't need any of that paper." It's like, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And that's when, like, as the lawyer, you just make sure that you have your piece written down in an email somewhere to be like, on this date and time, I told you this. I recommed this.
You
And
put
you
that right
said
into the file.
no.
When my name comes up in the lawsuit for not giving you good advice, no.
It's right here in documentary evidence.
Hey, at least as part of this legal document, like, this is all being described. The lawyers were telling it. The lawyers were saying it. The lawyers were saying it. The lawyers are very happy about this description of what they said.
Yep. Oh, yes, they are. Yes, they are. But I mean, right. It's when you have that conversation with the client to say, like, okay, when you go on vacation, do you pack an umbrella? Do you expect it to rain the entire time? Or do you think maybe there's a chance that it might rain at some point during that vacation and you just want to be prepared? That's what we're doing here.
It's a lot cheaper to talk about it when you're all happy and we're drinking mojitos, and let's get that done. Let's just get
Right.
And I say shotgun buy sell. They're the best. One side picks a number, the other side picks whether to buy or sell. They're perfect.
Yeah. Yep. You always do that when everybody's level-headed, everybody's happy, you're in the honeymoon phase, and you're thinking, like we are looking at our partners as if they are acting with their better angels.
Prenup advice from Richard Hogue and Legalbytes here.
I'm just saying buy sells are great. Okay. They have the perfect amount of incentive and game theory built into them. They're easy to draft.
Yeah.
Buy sell.
Yep. Exactly.
And they're not offensive. See, like, the problem I have with this kind of response is I know this response is like, well, that you are offending my marriage, good man, and whatnot. It's like, no, I am not. Things happen.
You're a human being too, and human beings get upset and emotional. And when people get emotional, they tend to do things that aren't exactly rational and sometimes do things against their own interests even.
I like people commenting on my choice of drink. See, if you don't know me from now, when I talk about these things in contract negotiations, I always use a drink. So it's always a mojito. Or it's a Mai Tai, Madras. They generally all start with M. That's just the way the plosives work. It's the way I like it.
There you go.
I wouldn't mind a nice mojito, although make mine with whiskey and we'll call it a mint julep instead, and it's all good.
Mint at least would work for my M paradigm. I can't.
There you go. See,
pina colada doesn't have the right sound.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I do enjoy a good pina colada.
I get it caught in the rain.
Sometimes.
Well, no, she doesn't like to get caught in the rain. Didn't you hear her talk about umbrellas?
I did, but okay.
We're not even getting into anything on midnight. Just press on.
All right, let's get back to the filing here. So it says, continuing with this quote here from the representatives, it says, again, I look to Terry and Robert to advise if they want to pursue such an agreement, which could also define their obligations on the seller's promissory note, emphasis added. Because Pitt did not want such an agreement, Jolie dropped the matter and did not insist on having a buy-sell agreement or any similar agreement. 8 days later, on May 8th, 2008, Jolie and Pitt decided to close the transaction without any agreement controlling or limiting how he and Jolie could sell their interests.
So that was a seller note. There's a note owed to the seller as part of this deal as well.
Is that a question?
Yes.
Oh.
I don't know. They describe it as seller's note. So that's important. That's the other reason why you'd have some kind of identification of obligations between the parties is if there's money that's still owed over a period of time, you have to cover what the world is going to happen if there's still money owed past these. Like, this is just dumb to not document the shared obligations here. It can be the simplest thing in the world. We are not talking about a 40-page agreement on this stuff.
Right. So I don't actually know if there was a promissory note. My guess is there probably would be if they financed it, there would have to be, right?
Yeah, well, the seller's promissory note suggests seller financing.
Yeah.
So that's great. Good job if you can get it from the celebs. But you do need to know who owes the money on that note should it come up.
Right. The entire purchase transaction was meticulously documented in writing with the advice of lawyers from at least 3 countries. Jolie hoped that the investment would prove fruitful both by providing a loving home for their 6 children and by growing the accompanying winery into a successful family business that would provide long-term financial security for their children and their own future families. To accomplish that goal, Jolie and Pitt, through Chateau Merival, formed a joint venture with Mark Perrin, a successful winemaker whose vision it was to turn Chateau Merival's winery into a vintner of world-class rosé wine. Jolie hoped and expected that as the business grew profitable, the profits would repay their initial investment and the winery would serve as a long-term asset for their family. Okay, so I guess my summary earlier is a little bit. I should amend my summary earlier a little bit. So it seemed like when I was reading it the first time through that she was basically saying this is not intended to be like a business. It's supposed to be like our home. But it seems like the way that it's been written so far, like it was like going to be a small family business, right? Like just kind of like get a return on the investment and like nothing more, right?
Well, I never know. It's like it's aspirational, right? That paragraph is like, well, you know, we've got a winery. Maybe it can pay for the thing eventually. That's more than when you usually buy a house, but it's not like we are just vintners now. So I think it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, most likely. And I will say that's a really good point is that, you know, when we're reading this is obviously coming from Angelina Jolie's perspective. This is as I think Emily D. Baker says that, you know, a complaint is basically allegations and shade. That's what it is, and that's what you have to take it as. And that's a really good way of putting it. So, you know, this is obviously going to be from her perspective. And when we're talking about divorce cases, no side, I mean, I don't like talking in absolutes. Hi, I'm a lawyer. But, you know, generally speaking,
yes,
there are very few cases where you have someone that is a perfect angel or a saint when it comes to a divorce, right? Because especially where it's a very messy divorce where things are very protracted and have lasted over 6 years, you know, like usually that happens because both sides are fighting and both sides are doing things to one another to prolong the litigation.
Divorce. I'm not a divorce attorney. So it's not, things can get wild. But yeah, when you read these complaints, it's like, well, I wanted to provide a loving family home and maybe we'd get some money out of it. It's like, yep, okay. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know whose document this was. I was like, I know whose document this is. Like you can definitely read them that way. It's like, oh yes, she's just it was just a normal transaction and I wanted to document it properly, but his lawyers were just very mean. And so I dropped it. Yeah. You know, it's like, yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a bit of that when we continue on.
Well, like, and the other side, the answer document will have a different perspective on these same events, and that's how it goes.
Yeah, exactly. So continuing on with this, Jolie then did everything within her control to help the winery succeed. She made substantial monetary contributions. She used her name and image to help elevate the winery's status and prestige. Arguably, Brad Pitt probably did all of that too.
I don't know. I've tried to use my name and image to give a winery prestige, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, I don't think we have that ability, Rick. But the winery was just one part of the couple's busy lives. They were raising 6 children while also pursuing successful Hollywood careers. I mean, that is true. That is true for both of them. It's not like an Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp situation where Amber Heard is comparing herself to Jason Momoa and all these other people.
No, they're on equal.
They're certifiably A-listers, both of them.
Yeah. They're both great in their own right.
Yes.
Although I'd have to say I think Angelina Jolie is better.
Personally.
Better actor?
Yeah.
I like them both. I like both their work.
I liked him in I like Brad Pitt in Fight Club, one of my favorite movies of all time. That was good.
It was good. Really good. I don't think that I've seen Brad Pitt in a performance that I didn't like though. Maybe Rick is a much more discerning moviegoer though. So you probably have some other thoughts.
I am not the biggest Angelina Jolie fan, but she is definitely the type of actor that has that profile. Does it match Brad Pitt's? You'd have to like line them up next to each other. She's certainly on that higher echelon. Brad Pitt is at bare minimum has more volume that I can think of in terms of the movies that he releases. And you know that that whole kind of like Ocean's 11 type stint, and that kind of leading into even more of the kind of celebrity fare, I think maybe isn't matched by Angelina Jolie in terms of just kind of raw presence. But I'd lean Brad Pitt. But I go back to like, what's my favorite Brad Pitt? Like something like Meet Joe Friday, like something off the wall. Spy Game. Y'all know Spy Game. I really like that one.
Spy
That's a
Game was
good
good.
movie.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yeah, I don't like that one.
Which they're both in. That was where they met.
I believe that's how they became Mr. and Mrs. Smith, if I'm recalling my rumor mongering correctly.
Exactly. Well, let's learn about what Jolie says is the reason for the fact that she doesn't have as much volume in her film career. So she says Jolie was also committing a substantial portion of her time to humanitarian work and philanthropic efforts, including her work as a special envoy for the UN High Commission for Refugees and her significant commitment to the family foundation, the Jolie Pitt Foundation. Jolie and Pitt, like other couples, divided their responsibilities and generally split costs. Jolie made her career as an actor and director secondary to her primary responsibility of raising children. She also oversaw the day-to-day running of the Jolie Pitt Foundation, to which she not only contributed substantial amounts of time, but also substantial amounts of cash, over twice what Pitt contributed. She clarifies here, more than twice.
Well, so now you've set the stage.
That's the shade part.
Well, for your drafting, you now establish that if you've got that much of a difference, you'll put it in the parenthetical. So when you go back up a paragraph and you talk about contributions to the winery, we now can assume Brad Pitt's probably in the neighborhood of what she contributed at the same time. So you do give away the game a little bit here. Okay, if it's double, you're going to say it. So now I can make assumptions about the things you don't say in other parts.
Fair point. Very fair point. Pitt continued with his Hollywood career and took primary responsibility for renovating the chateau. While the winery was one part of that renovation, the couple's initial focus was on transforming the chateau into a family home and a place for the couple to host retreats and meetings to support the couple's humanitarian and philanthropic efforts or endeavors.
That's what I use my winery for, yeah.
Yeah, me too. Jolie had always taken an active role in design for any home she had lived in and those she has since lived in. And when she and Pitt purchased the chateau, initially expected to do the same for their new home. But Pitt pushed for creative control consistent with his own taste and vision. While Jolie
control on the furnishings of the house. That's movie language there, folks.
Yeah, definitely is. Yeah. While Jolie would have preferred a more collaborative approach, she acquiesced to Pitt's desire to take control over the project, although she sometimes questioned why, for example, the chateau needed a fifth pool at the cost of 1 million euros, or why the same staircase needed to be rebuilt 4 times. If Jolie ever questioned such expenditures, Pitt defended them as critical to his vision for the chateau. Still, at least while they were a couple, we got some snorts from Rick over here.
What?
At least to his vision.
Hey, you don't know his vision.
He's an artist, okay?
You don't know his vision, and you don't know how these 5 pools are set up in an arrangement. Maybe they're set up so that they've like formed some sort of logo or something.
Well, look, I don't even know that you have to take these at face value, right? This is a complaint document. You get the things like she acquiesced and all that kind of stuff. So that's fine. It's just that this lawyer is having the language about creative control.
My vision involves a 5th pool.
Your vision, you're using the language of filmmaking with respect to this chateau in an amusing way, lawyer. So props to you.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, whose creative vision doesn't involve a 5th pool?
It really depends on how much money and whether it's any object and those kinds of things. You want a couple of infinity pools kind of layering together, as Kurt suggests. And then maybe you just want to see a couple pools below you just to give the kind of right viewpoint on the winery.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe you want one on the rooftop. Maybe,
the redos on the staircase, I can't explain. Realistically, the one time I would redo a staircase was probably enough construction that I would have to stomach. And by the time you're at the 4th version of the same staircase, I might have questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I almost would have expected, when I was reading this initially, though, I almost expected this portion right here, the Pitt defended them as a critical it's critical to his vision for the chateau. I almost, but like leading into it, it's like if she dared question him, like I thought that she was going to say something like, he was, in some sort of like more vicious kind of like response to be like, no, like you don't get to say anything about this. This is I don't know, like I expected something a little bit more visceral, I guess, but
yes,
saying
no,
that
this is very light. This is very light kind of interactions here.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Celebrities.
Yeah.
Hilarious. But yes.
Yeah. Still, at least while they were a couple, Pitt and his representatives generally sought input from Jolie and her representatives about his plans and expenditures.
It's pretty nice for a divorce document. It's pretty nice.
So far. Yeah. Yeah. Why Jolie separated from Pitt? Well, here's where we get into the darker stuff.
Spill that tea.
This is where the tea is going to be spilling all over the place.
Oh my.
Specifically, actually, it's not tea. We're going to talk about beer
It's
and wine getting
treasure
spilled.
Tea. It's not tea. It's Dragon's treasure tea. What's the discount code now?
Tea.
Is it still Legalbytes?
There we go.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Thanks,
No
Kurt.
problem.
So fair warning to folks that have been through DV circumstances. I want to issue a trigger warning because we are going to talk about violence involved in their marriage and all that kind of stuff. So I do want to say that before we continue through this portion. But let's get into it. So on September 14th, 2016, Jolie's marriage came to an end. On that day, Jolie, Pitt, and their children were flying to Los Angeles from Chateau Merival. Throughout the long overnight flight, Pitt was physically and emotionally abusive to Jolie and their children, who were then between the ages of 8 and 15. After that flight, for her family's well-being, Jolie decided to file for divorce. So that would mean, so the ages of these kids, so that means that now they were between 8 and 15. Let's do lawyer math. That is now they are between 14 and 21. If it's 6 years later.
Yeah.
I think. Okay. So yeah, they're now a bit older. We're not talking about like really, really littles. At this point, they actually do have probably decent memories of the event. They probably could speak to it, probably could testify to it. As documented in a lengthy and detailed FBI report, Pitt's aggressive behavior started even before the family got to the airport, with Pitt having a confrontation with one of the children. After the flight took off, Jolie approached Pitt and asked him what was wrong. Pitt accused her of being too deferential to the children and verbally attacked her. An hour and a half later, Pitt abruptly walked over to Jolie, demanding, "Come here," and directed her to the back of the plane. He pulled her into the bathroom and began yelling at her. Pitt grabbed Jolie by the head and shook her, then grabbed her shoulders and shook her again before pushing her into the bathroom wall. Pitt then punched the ceiling of the plane numerous times, prompting Jolie to leave the bathroom. As she exited, one of their children asked, "Are you okay, Mommy?" Pitt yelled back, "No, Mommy's not okay," and started deriding Jolie with insults. I'm
just trying to like parse this out in terms of like this being just like a marital spat versus something more abusive. I'm trying to think about this in terms of the various perspectives that might be in play.
Well,
that's what you see. That's what you see me calculating in my mind when I'm listening to this. I'm like,
Yeah. Well, I think that the physical grabbing by the hair and the shaking by the shoulders and slamming her against a wall definitely gets into abuse territory. And again, these are allegations. We don't know whether they are true or not, but I mean, I don't have one way or another of knowing one way or another, right? Like I'm entirely neutral as to whether or not this actually happened. I don't know.
Right, we're reading a complaint. Sometimes people don't realize that. This is their allegations, right? And we can't really judge anything. But we can relay what they're doing and what that would look like in the law. And certainly that's enough of an allegation of abuse. I would say that it's worthwhile to pay attention to.
Yeah, agreed. But I mean, if they were just in an argument at the back of the plane, him disagreeing with how she talks to the children, if she's being too deferential to them, I mean, even yelling at one another is not good, but in terms of the law, is that domestic abuse? It depends on the overall circumstances, right? It depends on the words that are used, I think. But generally speaking, my default is like if it's even a like a yelling match between two people, probably not abusive. But again, it depends on the things that are said.
Why is there an FBI report?
Because she made a report to the FBI of this, and she'll mention it again later.
Okay.
But this was what sort of came out with the headlines initially, with the whole DV situation in their marriage. This was within the last like month or two that the FBI, there was an anonymous report to the FBI that was recently leaked to the press, that someone had made that report and then questioned, like, why has there been no movement on this against Brad Pitt? And it's like, once that's leaked, everyone kind of was like, I mean, who else would be making this report?
Yeah.
So she'll refer to it again in just a moment. When one of the children verbally defended Jolie, Pitt lunged at his own child, and Jolie grabbed him from behind to stop him. To get Jolie off his back, Pitt threw himself backwards into the airplane seats, injuring Jolie's back and elbow. The children rushed in and all bravely tried to protect each other.
It's a little, I don't know, really dramatic somehow. Bravely tried to protect, I don't know.
Yeah.
The complaint,
Bravely is a word that I
You're not
wouldn't
wrong.
have. Yeah. I don't know that I would have used in this, because it's like the allegations themselves are serious enough that you don't like, this doesn't need fluff. So if you're adding fluff, it makes it feel disingenuous. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And then
I don't think you're wrong.
Yeah.
before it's over, Pitt choked one of the children and struck another in the face. Some of the children pleaded with Pitt to stop. They were all frightened. Many were crying. I am questioning these qualifiers.
Which qualifiers again?
How many? There's only two children, right, on the plane, the 8 and the 15-year-old.
No, they range between 8 and 15.
I'm
there were,
sorry.
I think, 6 of them.
Okay, all right. So okay, because I was confused there for a second. I apologize.
That's okay. Before it was over, Pitt choked one of the children and struck another in the face. Some of the children pleaded with Pitt to stop. They were all frightened. Many were crying. That's the kind of stuff that, if this is true, that's bad. That's really bad. That's exactly the epitome of bad, right? Like, if this actually happened, that's a different side of Brad Pitt that many people don't see, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's I mean, a lot of this stuff is damning. Throwing people into walls isn't good either,
Right.
but certainly
Right.
attacking kids is I mean, that's not, you're not gonna be able to walk back from that if there's evidence of that.
Yeah. Agreed. With nowhere to go and to avoid Pitt's wrath, Jolie and the children sat still and silent under blankets. Nobody dared to go to the bathroom. Pitt periodically emerged from the back of the plane to yell and swear at them. At one point, he poured beer on Jolie. At another, he poured beer and red wine on the children. After many tense hours, Pitt finally fell asleep.
Now, what do we mean by poured beer on? Do we mean that he was stumbling around in the aisle drunk and spilling his beer and wine? Or do we mean that he was like going up to them and like deliberately pouring that on top of them? What do we mean by these terms?
My impression of this is that he was drunk while this was all happening, because the other reporting on this was that he was very, very, very intoxicated. And I think he's commented on this also, where he said that he like regretted his actions from this incident, and said that he's like reconsidered his relationship with alcohol or something along those lines. I can't remember the specifics of it, but I remember him basically saying like he knew he screwed up on that. So the impression that I got from this was that this was like basically like a drunken rage, essentially, and ended with like him sloshing around. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's me filling in gaps that shouldn't be filled in that way, just through my perception, but I don't know.
I think that's the most likely reading, but the lawyers have used a word that implies intentionality to get that a little bit slid
It
forward.
does imply intentionality.
I don't think it mandates intentionality, so I think the lawyers are right there in the gray area. But I think,
and like some of these terminologies, you're like, what exactly does it mean? Like, you grab someone by the shoulders and shake them. Okay, what does that mean? Like, I place my hands on you while we're talking, or does it mean I did this? You know, it's like there's the phraseology is open to interpretations between the banal and the abusive. So, and it's a little bit hard to know what's exactly going on.
Right, but that's what we would expect from the complaint document, is to frame it as most advantageous for your client.
Right.
Yes. I'm also keeping that in mind as I'm interpreting it.
Yeah. So I guess him pouring beer on them does seem more intentional than, say, spilling beer and wine on them.
Yes, but of course, if you were drafting this, which one would you pick? You'd pick pour.
Right, I think poured implies intentionality. I think it also can imply amount. You know, the difference between spilled and poured can also be argued as poured is a lot versus spilled. So I mean, I think you can get away with it. I don't think the lawyers are lying, even if it were accidental. It's just that it's designed to make it seem, you know, really bad.
Right.
Yeah. Going back to the complaint, Jolie then arranged for separate transportation at the airport. After they landed, Jolie cautioned the children that no matter what Pitt did, they should not intervene. She then went to wake Pitt up and told him that she and the children were going to a hotel. Pitt once again screamed at her and pushed her down yet again. He shouted that nobody was getting off the plane and prevented the family from deplaning for about 20 minutes. After a child intervened and demanded to leave, Pitt finally relented. But once outside the plane door, Pitt again physically abused one of their children. He also grabbed and shook Jolie. I don't know what they mean by Pitt again physically abused one of their children. Like, what did he do specifically?
Mm-hmm.
Like, did he shove the child? Did he hit the child? Like, like what did he? I would have rather seen some specifics on that. He also grabbed and shook Jolie by the head and shoulders, causing one of the children to beg, "Don't hurt her." He let Jolie go, but then called her a bitch before adding, fuck you all. Sorry, I didn't censor it. That was directly from it. Jolie and the children then left and made it to a hotel. 5 days later, on September 19th, 2016, Jolie filed for divorce. Having been alerted to Pitt's conduct by a third-party witness, the FBI launched an investigation. Oh, so I guess the report she's I guess implying it wasn't her, but a third-party witness. After interviewing various witnesses, the FBI agent who conducted the investigation concluded that the government had probable cause to charge Pitt with a federal crime for his conduct that day. And the agent prepared a probable cause statement for referral to the United States Attorney's Office for prosecution. So that's the infamous plane incident.
I think a third party, if that's true, is helpful to her.
Is the probable cause statement available?
I
haven't seen it. It might be. We could probably.
I'd be interested if it's available in the public record. I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, I don't know if it is. But that is a good question.
Because it's a more neutral adjudication, right? It's none of the parties, right? And it's not to say that it's God, but it's a more neutral adjudication. So I'd be interested to see what the FBI thought there was probable cause to at least refer.
Yeah. So then she goes into her attempts to separate economically and then Pitt's attempt to silence her, according to Jolie. After Jolie filed for divorce, everything changed. Pitt kept all properties that the family had lived in, and Jolie's assets were largely tied up in Chateau Merival. Jolie did not ask for any of those properties or even alimony, but since her funds were tied up in the chateau, she did ask Pitt to lend her the funds necessary for her to purchase a home for her and their children. Pitt lent her the funds with interest, with the agreement once again memorialized and referenced in numerous writings. Jolie then largely put her career on hold, foregoing years of compensation in the process so she could focus her efforts on her family.
He lent her the funds with interest?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so when we start talking about documents that don't exist, I mean, if you're freaking writing promissory notes to each other to document interest payments, I don't, yeah, I have problems with you claiming a document that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those documents exist because at this point they realize that not all was right in the marriage, and maybe they do need some documentation after all. So at this point, we're into documentation.
Well, you live, you learn, but I still got to hold it against you.
Yep. So it you know, all things considered, in a divorce, it doesn't really surprise me that the loan would be with interest, but it does feel a little skeezy, doesn't it?
Yes.
The events of that day were traumatic to Jolie and the children. To this day, they have all been unable to return to Chateau Merival due to its association with these traumatic events, including the children who are now legal adults.
Some of them are.
Yeah. Well, including the children who are now legal adults. So not saying that all of the children are. With Chateau Merival now her most important asset, Jolie began to seek a more active role both in understanding the chateau and winery's various projects and in understanding and overseeing its finances.
It's her most important asset?
Yeah, because most of her net worth is invested in Chateau Merival.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. As disputes and complications arose in the related divorce and custody proceedings, Pitt's conduct hardened as he attempted to cement his control over the winery. Despite Jolie having the exact same ownership interest as Pitt, 50-50, he started excluding Jolie from any meaningful input in the management and direction of the business. Over time, he completely froze her out and largely cut her off from receiving information about its finances. Pitt also categorically refused Jolie's request to distribute any portion of the winery's profits. Instead, over Jolie's objection, he reinvested all of the profits back into the business and, as Jolie later learned, into Pitt's own projects. Pitt's refusal to distribute profits alone gave him a substantial leverage and control over Jolie in their ongoing disputes. See, I don't understand this part here is why, if she knows that her net worth is pretty much entirely invested in Chateau Merival, why not fight? Why not fight more for your access to that? Because I mean, someone else is managing these. They have some fiduciary duties to you. Arguably, right?
It's unclear what they mean by 50-50, honestly. This is the problem when you don't document as a separate. Presumably, they're using an entity of some kind that has some kind of ownership representation, and I would be willing to bet that the management is properly structured for whatever it is that Brad Pitt is doing here. That doesn't make it fair, but 50-50 ownership may not be documented properly for what we would consider a 50-50 equity share in whatever the ownership entity is. So absent that, I don't know whether she has corporate backing to fight it, because it doesn't look like 50-50 to the outside world. And I don't know, that's just me speculating as to how this even functions in that regard here. But that's what you can sometimes see, is that, okay, sure, you're a co-owner here, but one person controls all management decisions and all profits and all profit distributions, right? So at that point, if you've given up management control, they have a fiduciary obligation to the well-being of the entity and the shareholders. Even if you said you properly documented it properly with like all bells and whistles in a corporate document, if, let's just say, it's an LLC, it's owned 50-50, and management control entirely rests in one or the other of you, and that's probably how you would organize it, because you don't want a deadlock. You don't want the assets to die. Then that person probably has pretty broad authority to, one of the things that isn't objectionable on the outside, but could be, depending on what she's accusing him of, is reinvest the profits. Because the way anybody that runs an entity is going to work is that you're going to take the money, and then you're going to decide what exactly is needed for working capital and just operating the damn thing. And then you're going to decide what you want to do to grow it. And the money that goes into that, if management has the proper authority to decide that, and almost certainly they do on a normal operating agreement, that doesn't get netted out into profit share. Now, the accusation that it's going into Brad Pitt's projects is different from that if there is a 50-50 true equity ownership. But it's very difficult to parse out the specifics of what's actually happening behind the scenes with a paragraph like this.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, especially because if the money that's getting taken out could be categorized as, say, his income for his efforts in there, um, that could be a different story, right? Because
Yes, and you would
it's
draft the operating agreement that way. You would have salaries and other functions that are not going to count as distributions and all sorts of fun stuff that the lawyers and the accountants talk over. So yes, you can absolutely draft an operating agreement that way. That
so
looks entirely unfair, but that you could have signed up to.
do you think that they had an operating agreement then, considering
She keeps mentioning 50-50. So if 50-50 is actually on a document somewhere, it could be a 50-50 shared LLC interest. That's usually what we would see with a close entity like a family-owned chateau. Not that I'm, buying and selling wineries and chateaus too terribly often for my clients. But you would have an LLC, it owns a piece of real property, you name it the address, and maybe you say it's 50-50 owned for equity distributions, but somebody's going to be in charge of management. And probably you don't do two people of an equal stake, because the lawyer will go in there and say, that's a bad idea, Jeeves. Because if you ever disagree, then the assets wither and die. And so somebody has to have either full management authority or some kind of tiebreaker type vote. We call that deadlock protection. I have that conversation all the time. If you have that, then if Brad Pitt's the proper manager of the company, then yeah, he's absolutely allowed to invest whatever the profits would be back into the company. That's how management works. And then the only real issue, as I said, is into Pitt's own pockets. Chances are you didn't allow for a close family corporation LLC structure to have management be able to take out distributions for self-payment. But celebrities are weird. I don't know. And so I do see a situation where this paragraph reads more as regret for the structure you agreed to than an actual corporate malfeasance.
Yeah. That it is. That's a good point. It is drafted seemingly much more so with regret than I was entitled to X, Y, and Z, and this is what I did, and this is what you did.
Yeah, it's not fighting
so
very hard for you
therefore,
breached your duties to me. It's fighting more like, this sucked. And that I can't, that's fine. That might not be illegal.
yeah. So I'm wondering if this kind of fits back into that category that we were talking about earlier with the other cross complaint, where it talks about how she's like, I went off and did my humanitarian work, and then I came back and I tried to participate, and you froze me out. Which is like, I mean, the business has got to run somehow. You can't just like swoop in out of nowhere and then feel like, I'm here, let's participate.
It's possible. Yeah, and then you read it with at least that notion of this is their version of events. There's other ways to read it, and he could have been the one in charge and running it and didn't want another voice, and that might have been agreed to and as part of the structure.
Yeah. By 2019, Jolie was growing increasingly uncomfortable with continuing to participate in an alcohol-related business, given the impact of Pitt's acknowledged problem of alcohol abuse on their family.
It's fair.
Yeah. If I mean, assuming the plain incident is true, that's fair.
Yeah.
Resigned that Pitt would not share control of the winery or distribute any profits, concerned about participating in a business that was associated with such painful and traumatic memories for her and their children, and seeking financial independence. Jolie concluded that she needed to sell her interest in Chateau Merival. So she needed to sell her interest, basically, which, I mean, that sounds kind of reasonable, as saying, if I can't participate, all of my net worth is basically in this. I don't know if I want to continue doing business with this person that I'm trying to divorce. So I'm out. I've got to be out somehow.
Checks out.
By this point, Pitt had made it clear to Jolie that he viewed the winery as quote unquote his. For this reason, and as her co-owner, Pitt was the obvious first choice for any sale. Despite having absolutely no obligation to do so, starting in approximately June 2020, Jolie began, no obligation.
First of all, I agree with you, by the way. This is a pretty light kind of divorce complaint. I mean, even the beatings are kind of like lightly claimed. So I like this legal approach. But like Kurt has mentioned, there are these like despite having absolutely no obligation to do so, our client reached above and beyond, really, people that might be reading this or otherwise listening to these arguments. It's just funny. I love these documents.
No, it is. It is. The level of shade. And when you said that though about this being kind of relatively late for divorce proceedings, I don't know. You can look at it two ways. Either it's being light and being sort of like holding some ferocity back, or this is the worst that they can come up with wordsmithing, and
It's
that things
possible.
are not as bad as they want you to think that they are.
It feels a little bit more like the latter to me. Maybe it's just my perception.
I
It
think
feels a
this
little more
lawyer
like
did
the
a
latter.
good job because
Yeah, I agree.
I think it presents as high road. It presents as we're going to be high roading this, and we are dignified people, and we're not going to go mess in the muck, and we're just going to say these things as they are facts. And that might be because this is all I got. Some of it is, I mean, like this stuff on the plane is hard, but I like this approach. I like it considerably more than the kind of absolute fingernails in the skin attack documents that we've seen in other contexts.
Yeah. Well, but going back to it, despite having absolutely no obligation to do so, starting in approximately June 2020, Jolie began negotiating with Pitt on a potential sale of her interest in the winery. Despite Pitt's heavy-handedness in freezing Jolie out of the decision-making, Jolie was not opposed to selling her interest to him as long as the terms were fair. I know. The wordsmithing is good.
It's loaded terms. What is fair for Chateau Merival? Let's find out.
Over the years, she had invested nearly $40 million in cash, another $10 million of reinvested profits through 2016, and an additional $10 million of reinvested profits through mid-2021. If Pitt would agree to fair terms, the Chateau Merival was his for the taking.
What did you ask? You're delaying too much. What was your number?
Yeah. Yep. So she basically says that she's put in $60 million at this point. In February 2021, the parties reached an agreement in principle for Jolie to sell Pitt her entire interest in Chateau Merival for $54.5 million, which, including undistributed profits, was at or below her cost basis. Now, of course, we don't know how she added up these numbers. She might be padding these numbers.
Let's say they're all true, right? She's trying to take credit for reinvested profits, which have already been reinvested by the other side at the same time. Generally speaking, those net out against each other on cost. But okay, she wants $54 million. She thinks she's owed 60. This was a fight over getting you to $55 million or so. And I note that we're fighting about it in this legal document. So I imagine that agreement in principle had something happen to it.
The negotiators for the two sides even exchanged congratulations on reaching an agreement.
We do that.
We even congratulated ourselves. We went home, had a glass of champagne to celebrate.
A glass of rosé.
The lawyers do that. We do say they're fantastic. Now we can stop hating each other.
For the moment. But 1 month later, on March 12th, 2021, in the couple's child custody case.
It's SpongeBob meme 1 month later.
1 month later. In the couple's child custody case, Jolie submitted under seal, meaning no member of the public could see any portion of it except the document title, making that very, very clear.
It's just funny. It's like, this is a legal document. You're submitting this to the court. We do know what under seal means.
The court knows that. That parenthetical was not for the court. That parenthetical was for us. Yeah. Jolie submitted under seal an offer of proof and authority regarding testimony regarding domestic violence. God, I butchered that.
No, they butchered it. They have 2 re's there.
Yeah, they do. They do. This filing apparently enraged Pitt. As one might expect, I would add. That's me editorializing.
That's a hell of a title under seal.
Yeah. And in response to that submission, on March 26, 2021, Pitt's team notified Jolie's team that Pitt was stepping back from the Merival deal.
Yeah, okay.
So
honestly, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable set of events there.
Yeah.
I agree to $55 million, give or take. You file a domestic violence document. I say, we're going to rethink that whole $55 million. checks out.
Yeah. I can see many people doing this. In his First Amendment complaint in this case, Pitt claims that it was Jolie who pulled out of the deal due to a temporary judge's ruling that initially gave Pitt joint custody of their children. But a simple chronology of events confirms that this could not possibly be true. Yeah,
Look, you
that would be the
idiots.
finger
Don't you
there.
understand how a timeline works? You don't.
You're going Ace Attorney here, but contradiction, Your Honor.
Exactly. Jolie submitted her offer of proof and authority Ray testimony regarding domestic violence on March 12th, 2021.
Mhm.
Pitt pulled out of the Merival deal on March 26th, 2021. The temporary judge's initial ruling was nearly 7 weeks later on May 13th, 2021, and his final statement of decision was not issued until June 29th, 2021. And that ruling never took effect. Less than a month later, on July 23rd, 2021, the California Court of Appeal ruled that the temporary judge should have been disqualified for bias and that the temporary judge's ethical breach, considered together with the information disclosed concerning his recent professional relationships with Pitt's counsel, might cause an objective person aware of all the facts reasonably to entertain a doubt as to the judge's ability to be impartial.
What happened with this judge?
Apparently, he did not step away from the bench when there was a potential conflict of interest there, because he had some kind of a connection.
All right.
The Court of Appeals decision rendered the temporary judge's ruling null and void less than a month later. It was finalized. After it was finalized, rather. The temporary judge's ruling had nothing to do with the deal's collapse.
Okay.
In any event. But anyway.
Well, this is kind of but anyway, right? It's like, okay, correct the record. That's fine. But like,
yeah.
I don't care.
Right. Jolie still hoped that they could conclude their deal. They had an agreement in principle on all material financial terms, and her representatives encouraged Pitt to return to the bargaining table. Pitt was largely non-responsive, and so by May 2021, Jolie was receptive to considering a third-party sale. Now, let's see, May 2021. So, okay, the temporary judge's ruling was May 13th, 2021. So this is all ostensibly before the appellate court even heard that whole issue with that judge in the temporary ruling.
Right. So on the corporate side of things, even in the absence of a buy-sell, if you have any documentation on what the heck you own on this type of stuff, chances are you're restricted from doing a sell-off to a stranger. She might have some corporate issues with trying to pull this off.
Okay. So you do think that there is potentially an issue here with an implied agreement to give him right of first refusal?
I don't know. What I'm saying is that she claims 50-50 ownership. Usually that's documented somewhere in an operating agreement or something along those lines. This is a very 30,000 foot kind of description of what we're talking about here. So what I'm saying is, even if you didn't properly document just how you're going to extricate yourself from ownership of this entity, usually there's still a restriction on equity transfers for any number of reasons, not the least of which is you don't want randos, as Ms. Heard might say, on your cap table. And so that's probably something that could cause a problem. And that could, I don't know the laws of Luxembourg or France on this particular issue. But I don't know where this goes. So this is great. This is like a novel. I'm deeply invested.
I know.
But I do think as soon as you go, oh, well, if you're not going to buy it, then I'll sell to somebody else. You might not have the rights to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why not? I mean, if they don't want to buy it and it's yours, you can sell what you own.
No, not an entity. Right. This is all described throughout as an entity that owns this ownership stake in a vineyard / chateau. Right. Yeah. So in general, you're going to have restrictions on sharing equity in something all over the place. But
by the way, I've been spending the last 10, for those of you in chat who are wondering, I've been spending the last 10 minutes looking for a copy of this actual FBI report. I found several articles of people who say, we have seen a copy of the FBI report, but I can't find it because I was not kidding when I was like, I'd like to actually find it. Then I went to go look for it. And I've been frustrated by endless articles that refer to it without giving me copies of it, which is a problem.
Right. And I'm assuming here that you have some kind of standard off-the-shelf type operating agreement that you didn't really negotiate, and it just has standard restrictions and things on that, because they are talking about 50-50 ownership, and they are talking about management, and they're talking about things like profit distributions, which don't like naturally occur in the wild. And so you generally have a document that would be describing what exactly costs are and what profits are and how distributions work and what 50-50 means in this context, even if you didn't have a buy-sell. Like Brad Pitt isn't getting offended by the notion of having an operating agreement running, describing what the company is. He'd be upset about a buy-sell concept. Now, that might be giving them too much credit. And they just have this thing called Chateau Merival, and it's just in the ether, and it's an ephemeral thing, and they just treat it as 50-50 ownership. But generally, celebrities aren't messing around with things that can attach to, like, I don't know, their bank accounts. So you put an entity in place, you have some restrictions on ownership.
I'm selling my interest in virtual legality, whether you want me to or not, Richard.
And this is why I don't sell interest in virtual legality.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, Rick, because we're talking about, I mean, it's not just that they're celebrities, but these are people that we've seen in this filing right here, that they both were working with business managers, they were working with lawyers, these are sophisticated, one would think, people who neglected to go through a buy-sell agreement, sure, but you would think that there's other agreements possibly that they have entered into, other operating agreements, other documents here that can help to govern what's supposed to happen.
Right. And there's 20 years of my experience that goes into a bunch of all the rest of this stuff. What do the taxes do? What is the statutory disclosures? What is everything else that happens here? But in general, if you're going to have an enterprise, you want at least one level of entity in place, because if the guy you have groundskeeping, hurts himself, you want to have a separation between you and the bank accounts. But yeah. I can't speak to what was done here, other than the fact that she thinks she owns 50% of it. That doesn't seem to be argued. And she wants to sell it. And usually this is the place where if you call me up, I say, okay, let's look at your governing documents, because chances are you can't move out your interest that easily.
Yeah. Another part here that kind of caught my eye is that it says Pitt was largely non-responsive. That means that he was admittedly somewhat responsive.
That's true.
So there were some back and forth communications to some extent. I mean, even if he was responding to give her a proverbial middle finger, so to speak,
just grunts in email form.
Yeah, just exactly. But largely non-responsive kind of seems like it sort of tips their hand a little bit to say, well, no, there were some communications between the two of them, because they can't go forward and say he was unresponsive. He was non-responsive at all.
The lawyers can't strictly lie.
Yeah. You can imply, you can kind of paint a fuzzy picture around the edges, but yeah, you can't go quite that far. And based on some of the other things that they've said so far, I would think that if they could say that, they would. So, yeah. So it seems like they probably were having some communications, and then they just said, you know what? Screw it. Let's sell it to Stoli. Mm-hmm. But before proceeding further down that road, Jolie decided to give Pitt one last opportunity to buy her share of the winery. On May 9th, 2021, Jolie provided Pitt with a revised draft agreement that constituted her final offer. The revised draft made concessions to Pitt, and Jolie was hopeful he would accept it.
Need more detail.
To Pitt and Jolie was hopeful. Yeah. Revised draft agreement. The fact that she was hopeful that he would, I would assume that she was hopeful that he would agree to it, because that's why she's making an offer in the first place, right? I mean, hopefully it's a bona fide offer.
Well, one of the things that's happening in the background here, right, is if it's a revised draft agreement, that means a draft agreement was provided at some point in time. So what they've talked about with an agreement in principle is what we might consider a term sheet. It's like the bullet point emails that say it's 55 and it's over this period of time and this is financing and all the rest of that kind of detail stuff. You put an agreement together, that means it's proceeding. She had something in place that she could revise. Generally speaking, this kind of thing that's described on May 9th isn't what's ever going to work, which is that, all right, screw it. We're not conversing anymore. I'm just going to make some red lines and send it over. And this is the offer. Nope. None of my clients are going to sign it that way. So that's either a shot in the dark or it's a prelude to what you want to be able to present in advance of a third party offer sale.
Right. When Pitt ignored the offer, Jolie then gave him until May 31st, 2021 to accept her, quote, last and final proposal, and then simultaneously advised him that if he did not accept it, Jolie would consider and pursue her available options of whatever nature. That's pretty vague.
It sounds a lot more like their counsel was doing this, but it does
Yeah.
get a little bit mixed up when you're looking at a legal document.
Right. So I would like to see what that revised draft agreement actually looked like, because was it like a good faith effort to actually try to close the deal, or as you know, as you mentioned, I mean, was it just like a hey, I'm going to cover my bases here before I actually go and kind of ditch this guy and make an offer elsewhere?
The truth is that there shouldn't be a ton to negotiate. If it's a 50-50 sale at a set number, you're not talking about concessions. He doesn't want to buy it at that price. That's what happened anyway.
Yeah. Fair point. On June 2nd, 2021, after the expiration of Jolie's final offer, Pitt sent a revised agreement that for the first time laid bare why Pitt had withdrawn from the negotiations in March after the agreement in principle had initially been reached. For the first time, Pitt demanded that Jolie be bound by a broad non-disparagement clause that would prohibit Jolie from discussing outside of court any of Pitt's personal conduct toward her or the family. Combined with Pitt's pre-existing demand that he have the right to hold $8.5 million of the $54.4 million purchase price for 4 years, the new clause created an unconscionable gag order over Jolie enforced by an $8.5 million holdback.
I don't know if it's unconscionable, but it is.
Yeah.
You know, that's a lawyer doing their job.
Yeah. So, I mean, does Jolie like that? No, obviously not. I wouldn't either if I were in her position. But is that an unconscionable? Does that make this contract unconscionable? No, that's essentially an NDA. I mean, that happens all the time. Or a confidentiality clause, you know, as part of this agreement to say, hey, look, we're going to go our separate ways, but you're not going to go and talk about anything that happened on this date. So yeah, coming on top of the traumatic breakup of their family and the years spent trying to heal their family, during which time she never spoke publicly about the events that led to their separation, Jolie could not take any more abuse. In an effort to preserve her own mental health and well-being, Jolie decided to turn over the negotiations to her designated representatives and let them decide how best to finalize any sale. On June 13th, 2021, Jolie's representative gave Pitt notice that she was doing so, telling him, I am writing at my client's request to inform you that Jolie is stepping back from all aspects of negotiations regarding the sale of her stake in Merival and has empowered me to act on her behalf because Pitt's new demands were distressing and coercive to the point of being abusive. Even then, Jolie was cognizant that Pitt's share of the winery would economically benefit their children and be part of their inheritance. Jolie's intent was for her advisors to help her either close the deal with Pitt or find a third party who could add value to the winery. On June 15th, 2021, Jolie's representatives notified Pitt that Pitt's newly expanded non-disparagement clause and $8.5 million holdback provisions were unacceptable. He also specifically put Pitt on notice that in light of his rejection of Jolie's final offer and attempt to include this new unconscionable non-disparagement clause, Jolie considered herself free to pursue any other transactions that she would deem appropriate to undertake. Pitt did not respond with a counteroffer or otherwise contend that Jolie did not have the authority to sell, nor did he claim, as he does now in this case, that he and Jolie had some secret, unspoken, unwritten right to buy the other's interest and to bar the other from selling their interest to anyone else forever. Instead, Pitt once again ignored Jolie's overture. So that's basically her attempts. And then she basically says that she went and sold to Stoli. So we don't need to go through all of these details here, but let's see here. I think this might be the last section. Yeah. So basically all of this is asking.
the reference at the top. You mentioned this company before, but she says she's holding her interest in her LLC called Nouvelle.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, that means that you can't be doing this kind of back of the envelope. I own 50% of this thing we bought. It has to be actually documented. It has to be an equity interest in something. You put that on the asset sheet of your other LLC, which means that the company in question that you're talking about has some kind of governance documents. So, I mean, like that's the missing piece for me in this description is what in the world was the governing interest of this company, and or whatever other statutes might apply to that. Because again, I don't know Luxembourgian law.
Exactly. So it's interesting to me here that they don't have some sort of an agreement on this taken down in writing. But so now, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see this moving forward. So basically she concluded that the sale to Stoli happened, and now she wants declaratory relief on a number of issues. First, she wants to know whether Pitt has a consent or a veto right over Jolie's ability to transfer her interest in Chateau Merival to a third party, which is essentially, I mean, that's a question that needs to be answered in the underlying complaint as well. The second issue is she wants to know whether Jolie's sale of her interest in Nouvelle to Tenuta del Mundo is valid and final. She says that it is. And then third, whether Pitt rendered any consent or veto right unconscionable, void, and against public policy by conditioning his purchase of Jolie's interest in Chateau Merival on Jolie's agreement to a non-disclosure agreement that would have prohibited Jolie from speaking outside the court about Pitt's physical and emotional abuse of Jolie and their children. According, those are her words. I took it directly from the complaint. She says it renders any contract unconscionable. As to that third one, I don't think so. I don't think that it rises to the level of an unconscionable agreement to have a non-disclosure agreement to talk about a particular incident or even a set of incidents like that. But
you could get there. She's trying to describe a situation where she locks up all her money. He steals the money from her, doesn't otherwise distribute it, and then asks for a very large holdback, at least to us normals out there in the world, of $8 million, and then says, you can't talk about anything I might have done to you. I think in the right jurisdiction, maybe some California jurisdictions, you could get into an unconscionable public policy kind of issue, and I think that's what she's probably being advised on. It's not the worst argument in the world. But no, in general, the biggest problem is that if you haven't documented what your buy-sell right might be, it's unclear what conditions you could apply to that. Generally speaking, a buy-sell would say it's a number, and you can't make them do anything weird. And like, this is how it's going to work. And that's the bulk of what that agreement would be is here's the logistics. It's not even the kind of like top line potential problems. So yeah. And the other thing I noted in your document that you were just looking at that is interesting is that the reason she ties it to Nouvelle is that she doesn't sell the chateau. She sells Nouvelle. And like, so it's a second order function there of, okay, so if Nouvelle owns that interest and I move Nouvelle, is that allowed? Apparently Pitt has no problem with her moving Nouvelle, but has a problem with the underlying asset interest. And so this is why you document stuff, folks. If there isn't a document that has a restriction on transfer, if there isn't a document that has a right of first refusal or a right of co-sale or whatever else might be in there, it could be a potential problem for Brad Pitt. In a divorce proceeding, you might have a full King Solomon. I mean, you can do whatever you want equitably on this kind of stuff. But again, I see things with the lenses that I see them in, which is corporate lawyer. Sorry.
I love it. No, it's been really helpful to have that angle while reading this, because I mean, otherwise I'm looking at this as contracts, like generally speaking, but without that corporate element. So having
undocumented liquidation concepts make me sad. Think about your liquidations, folks.
Think about how you're going to get out.
Not
right?
legal advice.
You need an exit strategy.
I have returned from the void.
Oh, you're still in the void. You're just a talking logo.
Yes.
This is fair.
This requires me to be less civilized, so.
Oh, you were already uncivil.
Yes. Even more so now.
Well, let me get a few super chats here. and then we'll continue. Mavi Vasquez, thanks so much for the super chat. Says my father's name is Dick and my mother's name is Karen.
See, I feel bad for that situation.
Yeah.
Those people
Yeah.
didn't choose their names.
Yeah.
I mean, Dick probably did. Chances are it's a Richard. Sometimes it's not.
You could have gone by Rick.
Could have gone by Rick. Rick's an excellent choice.
Yeah.
Skinny Ninja, thanks so much for the super chat.
You want to be skinny. Keeps you stealthy.
Andy the Game Maker, thanks for the super chat again. Is Rich talking about putting things in places where no one can find them again?
Is that a clip of me somewhere?
I think
when
he
you're
said
online a lot, streaming a lot, people can clip you to say whatever they like, generally speaking.
I think Andy clipped you, or at least he said he was going to clip you from the last time you were on. It may have been when we were talking about the Dahmer case. I can't remember exactly, but there was something that you said along those lines and he thought it was hilarious.
I think it's so cool that you have such support from your family on this stuff.
Yeah. Well, likewise. It's fun when I mean, Mrs. Hogue is often in the chat. She was in my chat earlier. And your dad will super chat you all the time. It's funny. I love it. I love it so much.
Pop in.
RJH00, thanks so much for the super chat, says, could Pitt offering ridiculous low amount be considered a refusal, or does he have to say I refuse?
As described, we're way outside the bounds of have to do anything. We're not really talking about contract law at a certain level here. So Jolie says he refused. Does that mean he refused? Does that mean he offered something that was a low amount? We're not into a place where somebody has to do something. There are not hard and fast rules on that.
Fair point. So, well, that for me about does it. Do you guys have any final thoughts on any of the stuff that we've talked about today?
No, what an interesting program, and not at all toxic or acid or otherwise involving any serial killers, as you promised.
Wow.
So,
yep.
We all feel deprived.
Well, Kurt, I'll have to have you on sometime when I go through, I don't know, some other piece of testimony from the Dahmer trial. How about that?
That'd be fine. Also, we need to figure out when we're doing game night so that we can play Crypto Cartel, because I want a piece of that.
I think that is a fantastic idea. I think we should definitely do that. I am very, very excited to try that out on Steam. I know he's been talking about that for a while, so I'm happy to see that he's actually putting that forward.
Excellent.
So, alrighty. So that for me about does it. Thank you so much to my wonderful guests, my great friends for being here. Rick and Kurt, you guys are awesome as always. And I love your insights and your perspectives. Great conversation. Love it. If you guys want to check them out, I haven't added them in the description yet. I'm so sorry. I'm slacking on that, but in a minute I will add them. But otherwise you can see links to their channels in the chat right now. So you can go and click right there. If you haven't subscribed to them, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life right now? You need to be subscribed to them. They've got some really great content on their channels, really great insight on their stuff. And thank you again to everybody that's in the chat. Thank you to the mods. Mods, you guys are always doing such a wonderful job of making sure that that conversation is flowing. It's civil. It is, people can agree or disagree, but, we want to do so respectfully, hopefully, mostly for the most part. Exactly. So if that for me will about do it. And I will see you guys in the next video.